there's a lot of students on the current wait list for Lehman Academy that don't live in Douglas County. And so that would be additional funding coming into Douglas County from surrounding areas where those students are not currently captured.
Good evening, Board of Directors. At this point, I'd simply like to give a background on the Long Range Planning Committee's involvement with the Lehman Academy request. As you know, the Long Range Planning Committee is represented on the Charter Application Review Team, so they were already aware of the replication, that they were part of the recommendation for approval. And last month at the LRPC's meeting on August 3rd, the staff and Lehman supported this request from Lehman for a dedicated school site. And understanding, as Mr. Mosier stated, the Crowfoot Valley is the top priority for capacity that is not included in the 2022 bond in the long range. The Long Range Planning Committee, without a doubt, supported Lehman's request for a dedicated school site, and you can see the resolutions that passed. The first resolution did not pass in consideration of the surrounding school capacities, the enrollment, and in particular, the Cobblestone Ranch school site was south of where most of the growth is coming, and there was a potential for traffic impacts on that arterial road feeding the Cobblestone Ranch school site. So those are the main reasons that resolution failed. And with that said, though, the Long Range Planning Committee, in alignment with their submitted master capital plan, supported Lehman Academy's request for a school site as long as it is in accordance with staff's needs for capacities as well as the replication that has been approved. I want to echo what Mr. Mosier said. It has been a pleasure working with Lehman Academy from the first, very collaborative. They want to honor and respect and respond to our capacity needs, weighing their lottery annually. We looked at multiple sites. We looked at it from the data perspective. Where do we have long-range growth along the Crowfoot Valley corridor? What school sites are available? Where the school sites are located with respect to the already built or underway or even future residential development. And all of that is in your packet of materials.
One of the areas that I wanted to highlight as well, there was some discussion in the long range planning committee meetings of what do those numbers look like right out of the gate. And again, remember they're starting with a PK5 enrollment here. You can see the anticipated numbers. These are from the replication application, and then a slow roll up into 6, 7, and 8 is the plan. So it's not a pre-K 8 in year 1. It's a pre-K 5 with a roll up to each grade level in subsequent years.
Directors, this is a visual of the school capacity spreadsheet that you've seen before and is depicted in the master capital plan by school on every school page. Basically, it's a heat map. The red shows where we have capacity issues along the Crowfoot Valley corridor, and specifically the 4 schools in the Ponderosa feeder are forecasted in 5 years to be as much as 166% capacity. So that is the 5-year projection. I also want to note that we recently, as a department, looked at our enrollment projections in our August membership, and our accuracy is very good. In fact, we overprojected only by 99 students of all neighborhood magnet alternative and charter schools, including Hope Online. So we feel good about the accuracy, but the look here is in the 5-year projection. And there's additional materials about the long-term build-out and what particular attendance areas and what subdivisions are forthcoming. And in general, the growth is coming from the north portion of this red. We have Anthology Hess, we have Trails at Crowfoot, Cielo. All of these areas are just starting to develop, and it continues at a fast pace. So I just want to highlight these maps here. These color codes are slightly different than your school capacity spreadsheet because we basically had breaks in the percentages here to better visualize. But basically red, 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 And one last thing, this is the Cielo school site. So Cielo is a beautiful 22-acre site. The reason it's 22 acres is because this land dedication was a result of 3 planned developments. And instead of getting multiple small 7-acre school sites, which would be challenging, we had the great opportunity to master plan with the developer to get one central school site that could feed all of the adjacent planned development. And it's held by the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners. It's on Bayou Gulch. And it is large enough for Lehman Academy as well as the district to share that space. Ideally, each entity could get 11 acres. Adjacent to this site and south is a future Metro District park site. We have an intergovernmental agreement as a district with that Metro District for long-term capital renewal of that site. Very similar to our agreements with Highlands Ranch Metro District and South Suburban Park for Shea Stadium, for all of our parks, for Stone Mountain Artificial Turf Field, et cetera. So it's a great win-win opportunity that any entity could use.
And here you see this is not a plus delta or a pros and cons. This is just highlighted points from both DCSD and also from Lehman in looking at this proposed site. Number one, I think that is a strong indicator on both sides is it aligns with the area of replication in the application. So this was directly written into the application for Lehman Academy, it was targeting in the Crowfoot Valley corridor. It also meets the capacity needs of Douglas County, as you just saw on that map. We have, one of the things that played in during the long-range planning committee meeting was that the area of Cobblestone Ranch was quite built out. Well over 50% of the homes in that area are already built out. The Cielo site, as you can see, is the last point on the bottom side here. It's a low build out. It's actually at 0 right now. So the number of homes in there, they haven't been built yet, but they will. They will be coming. And it also, that more northern location helps us meet some of that capacity needs that Mr. Cosgrove was showing in that red. We want to try to get as far away from that yellow as we can up into that red to really help with that capacity issue that we have there. On the other side, there's adequate staging area for cars and drop-off, ingress and egress on 3 streets. Instead of, sometimes that is an issue that we run into with charter school sites because there's so many busing in, or not busing, but driving in, that we don't want to create traffic backups. But having a site that has multiple areas to come in and out of is a really good thing when there's the majority of the population is driving. It allows us to split that up and see how things work in the future. And also, there's a road system to property that is easiest in all of the Crowfoot Valley corridor. It's not pigeonholed to one area. You can get to the spot from multiple places. So based on that, based on the work of the team and based on the collaborative conversations back and forth between staff and Lehman, staff recommends at this point leasing a long-term lease arrangement where we still own the property but lease for a long number of years, 11 of those 22.48 acres to Lehman Academy, while the district retains the remaining 11.48 for future use as we see fit. So thank you, and I now entertain any questions.
Okay, directors, before we start, trying to keep to the new norms, we have 30 minutes allotted, so I'd like to try to keep your first question to about 4 minutes, and we'll ensure all directors have a chance to speak, and then we'll come back. So any directors that would like to start? I'll throw a quick one out there while we're waiting. Is both a charter parent and a parent of a daughter with special needs. There's often been a perception around our charter schools. One of them has been they don't serve the local community, and the other one is that they don't adequately, again, a perception, serve students with especially severe special needs. I am really impressed with the partnership and the willingness to step up and kind of counter those two perceptions. So if this land sale goes forward in exchange for those two programs, what do you, Director I guess you're a director of choice programming, Director Mosher, believe will be in the impact on that perception of charter schools? And do you think that will set a new bar for other partnerships with charters going forward?
Thank you. First, I want to make sure I also clarify that, in our current model, the 25% of the costing for those, even though those charter schools are not actually having the students in their school, 25% of the transportation and Plum Creek and all Child Find and all the different services that we provide as a district, the charters are responsible for 25% of that financial obligation because they have 25% of our students. So that piece is being met and has been for some time. I think it's an innovative, it's an exciting. I know that a number of charter schools have discussed this in the past of what could it look like and how might we work on this. And for us to enter an agreement like this where we can mutually put pieces together that we feel can be beneficial for the community of Douglas County while also meeting contractual needs of the district. I think that's another key component is we have the ability to set this in place throughout as we learn. So we can keep making these revisions and get better as we go. We have an amazing special education department with tons of experience, and also there are people at Neiman Academy with a solid amount of background in special education, and a number of our charter schools have that as well. So I think it opens a very interesting door for us. I think it allows us to maybe keep some families together in a better way, where if I have a child that wants to go to where I would rather have them in a charter school, but their significant need prohibits them at this time from going to school with their sibling. This allows us to have another opportunity there. So from my perspective, I think it opens up a very good door for us to see what we can do better in the future.
Thank you. Other directors? Director Myers?
So just a couple of questions regarding construction. So I'm not sure if this is a Lehman question or if you can, Mr. Mosher. They're opening in 24, 25. So pre-K. Now, when you begin, and so we're looking at 2 years, if the vote and the land works out and we vote for that. So that's quick. So how does that happen? I guess.
Figured you were going to call on me.
All right, good.
Thank you for the question. Actually, in the olden days, before COVID and supply chain problems, we were building schools in 9 to 10 months, sometimes 11. We have set aside 16 months, minimum of 15, for the start of earthwork and construction, foundations, and building. We are already have a architect on board. The architect has done initial planning of what the modules of the building will look like without a particular space to put them on. And we had a meeting with them this morning for a couple hours and got down the road on that a bit. I believe that they have a civil engineer who, if we come to an agreement, hopefully, 2 weeks from now, and then there'll be some legal time involved, but they'll start work immediately with a civil engineer designing where this layout can be, then start putting the modules on it and start working on construction drawings. Because this is in Douglas County, we can go directly to the state for the approval of the plans, which they have done a lot of, our architects, and they know all the people up there, and it's about a 8-week period of time, which they told me today. So, but we can put in our grading plans and our utility plans and our footprint plans before the final construction drawings are done. So my hope is that our renewal application will be completed in January. February, we'll do a bond deal, and we'll have already ordered an elevator. We will have ordered material for the roofing that we will need. We will have ordered aluminum window things. All of these things take months and months and months. And so we definitely plan to get orders in and way ahead of the game. We will have a contractor involved early on with the architects who will work with them and end up being the builder, so that there'll be coordination from the beginning, and they'll be working on the plans. That's to help us in a way to keep the cost down. But it's going to speed up a lot of things as well, and it'll move much quicker. That's a lot of information.
Can I
Is that
ask
more than
another
you wanted?
Construction question, do I have time? Okay, Mr. Farley, also, so 24, 25 is PK, then you add 6, 7, 8, and we're looking at 28. I'm just asking for construction because I'm not knowledgeable about that. When you build a charter school, is the continual construction or is the building completed?
We've been through both of those
Okay.
scenarios, and we're going to get the money now and build the whole thing right now.
Okay, and just add.
Because nobody has any idea where these costs are going to go, and I haven't heard nobody say they're going down, nor interest rates going down. So we're going to
Okay.
bite the bullet, get the money, and start building and build the whole thing right now. It's much easier. It's less confusing for the kids. We've had on-site construction at our other locations, and it's a zoo, and we don't want to go through that.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
okay? Any? Oh, I'm sorry.
And Director, if I may, to also add, so the 24 months, almost 24 months for Lehman to open up a school aligns with the district timelines for neighborhood schools in the bond as well. The difference is from a bond vote to late spring, early summer of '23, for example, that's when the district sends out requests for qualifications, hires an owner's rep, hires project managers, obtains funding, pre-qualifies architects, interviews them, selects, negotiates a fee, and brings those to the board. So all of that time basically is in the past for Lehman because they've already done that. So once we get to that point, it's typically 12 months for design and permitting simultaneously and 12 months for construction. It's the same.
Thank you.
Other directors? Director Ray?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say I'm not at all surprised that you found Lehman staff quite collaborative, because that's been their claim to fame since they opened their schools. They definitely are people that I believe really see themselves as part of Douglas County School District. So I just want to, again, just echo that praise. I do, though, want to understand, and I have some history, but I think I would like staff to explain, why did we not allow center-based programs in our charter schools? Because I know that we have had charter school directors who have said, yeah, I'd love to have a center-based program. However, as a district, we took a position that said, no, we will not put a center-based program. So is there anybody, I know Dan's been, you've been around here for a long time, but I wonder if there's someone that can capture for us and for our public the history of why this is the first time center-based program has been considered for a charter school.
Well, I can speak somewhat to that, and then I will also have Assistant Superintendent Windsor jump in. I don't think we've ever taken, the district that I'm aware of hasn't ever taken a hard stance one way or another. It is constantly a discussion, and I think this is the first time that we're moving from a discussion of possibilities to maybe we can actually make this happen and pilot it and see how it goes, so that our other charter schools can look and consider as well, and we can consider moving forward. As Director Mosier mentioned, we absolutely do cost sharing with our charter schools. So every center-based program in our district, 25% of the cost is covered by our charter schools, same with transportation, et cetera. We are the LEA, so that does mean that we hold the liability. However, with Hope Online always handled with district staff, initially with district staff, handled all special education students. Assistant Superintendent Windsor.
No, thank you, Director Ray. Appreciate the question. It's actually a conversation we've had many years, even prior to the role as the Director of Choice Programming back in 2018, I think it was. It's always been a conversation, but the formality of someone coming forward to say, yes, I would like to do that. This was really the first time it's been entertained in a formal manner about taking on a center-based program. And so I think that's where you probably see a little bit of the excitement is there's been a lot of conversation, but the idea of formally actually having a request of moving forward with that is something that I think we finally have seen in that process. And then it was a matter of working through the logistics of that idea of the payback from our charters and what would that look like. And so it was really spending some time looking at that option. But we've never received actually a formal request to add on a center-based program, at least during my tenure as a director of choice up until this point. I don't know if you want to add anything at all, Mr. McMenemy, as well.
I'll try.
Okay.
Good evening. You know, that's a great question. I think one of the things I think about is the number of schools built up to the year 2010 and the capacity at those schools. And I wonder if that was a factor as well, is that it was easier to keep those center-based programs in our neighborhood schools because we were growing schools and we had space in those schools. And I think the unique thing about this opportunity is there's a demonstrated need in the Parker area for seats in various programming. And from the memo that we sent, you can see that there is already capacity issues in our Parker area for our center-based programs. And so this is a unique opportunity for us as a district to provide additional seats for no additional cost. Gain some square footage through a partnership with the charters.
Thank you. I'll take other directors and we'll come back. Director Hanson?
My question is actually for Mr. Edwards, if he would be comfortable with fielding one, hopefully an easy one. I remember in early conversations with Superintendent Kane when she just briefly floated this idea, and I'm not sure, I really think it's a great idea and a great opportunity for Lehman. And we've heard a lot of the logistics and the details, but I really want to give you an opportunity to speak to why you want this at Lehman. This is an enormous undertaking to pilot a program like this, and it's going to require an equally enormous amount of effort to make it successful. And I'd really like to hear from you of how that piece fits in with your school.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Well, good evening, Superintendent Kane, directors. Yeah, I think, you know, like you expressed, Director Ray, just I think many principals and directors of charter schools would love this idea as well and get excited by it, just as my staff and I are. So it just feels like the stars aligned and we have a really good opportunity. And so, you know, I think a couple of things. For me personally, it is very exciting, but I'm here to learn, you know, and I personally would not want to take it on without a lot of support and guidance and direction from Danelle Hyatt and her whole staff. And we do have on our staff at our current Lehman campus, very passionate, very dedicated case managers and you know, learning specialists, and two of them already have experience at center-based programming. And so even in just sounding off this possibility with them, they're very eager to, again, to partner, to learn, and to receive that guidance. And as Mr. Mosher expressed, I think for, you know, our mission statement as a school is really a classical program, and it's similar to Douglas County. We're here to develop tomorrow's leaders today, and the end goal of a classical program similar to core knowledge in schools that focus on character development, you want scholars to be growing in wisdom and in virtue. And so this is a wonderful way to develop those whole persons, that well-rounded approach to education. So for all those reasons, I will be learning, but it is very exciting, and without a wonderful staff, I would feel like we shouldn't go there, but I feel like, again, all the stars seem to have aligned, so we can't pass it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Williams.
So actually mine might be to Mr. Cosgrove, only because last week at Long Range Planning Committee, one of the concerns I think that I've heard a lot is that building a charter school in this area is going to actually take away from Franktown, Sagewood, just some of those closer schools. And I found one of the slides very interesting that you presented last week, saying that that's actually not how it generally works, that really they're pulling from all over the district. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to that, to kind of help the community understand that.
Thank you for the question, Director Williams. So the important thing here is, as in the past with our other charter schools on dedicated school sites, Lehman would annually weigh the lottery as directed by the planning staff based on where we need capacity. And the key point here is it's not current or one-year enrollment projections, it's 5-year. There's a lot of development coming. We desperately need capacity in the Crowfoot Valley corridor. And so our job would be to work in partnership with Lehman, who's already committed to weighing their lottery. Their waiting list are basically across that whole geographic area, including Mountain View and Northeast Elementary. So that would be our job to make sure that lotteries are weighed where we need capacity. And if we have existing capacity at a school, that's not where we would highlight to weigh their lottery.
Other directors? Director Meek?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Mr. Mosier, first, I don't believe the CART process incorporated a look at the center-based programming. So I'm just wondering, are there aspects that need to be reviewed by, say, the special programming department, or even like the transportation study that was done? Are there aspects of the CART review that need another look based on additional programming?
I think, and thank you for asking it, I think that as we went through the process, this is something that we can draw up legally as a portion of the contract. At this point, the replication itself has been, and we do amendments through that process. That's a normal process where we can make those amendments and changes. But at this point, that would be something, if this was entered into and this relationship was established, that we would be able to outline that contractually between our team and theirs of exactly what would be happening contractually. And then we have a role as an authorizer to ensure that contract is met.
And then I was curious about feedback that we've heard from the special needs community. Do you know if Lehman has had a chance to talk to the Douglas County Special Education Advisory Committee or receive feedback in that area? Maybe that's a question for Lehman.
Maybe Mrs. Hyatt?
So we are very interested in engaging in this conversation with DCCAC. Although we had not had the opportunity at our meeting last week, it was just put out there at the end of the meeting, but we are looking forward to engaging in a collaborative conversation with DCCAC at their upcoming meeting.
Related to that, will that happen before our next board meeting? Will there be an opportunity for that engagement?
So our next DCCAC meeting, they meet on a quarterly basis, would not be prior to the next board meeting.
No, you've got time. Your questions were short.
May I jump in, President?
Go ahead, Superintendent Kane.
Thank you. I would like to just add to that question. We have had feedback in the past from our charter school community that they would like to see center-based programming in some of our charter schools, because that's the community that is attracted to the programming at the charter school is the community that would be impacted by this. And I think that the point that Director Mosier brought up around separation of siblings is very, very significant. We have lots of families who choose a charter school for their kids based on their kids' needs, but might have a sibling who has to then attend a center-based program in a neighborhood school, and keeping their family together is important to them. I would also just suggest that the concept behind this is as a pilot. So as we go through implementing this pilot, we would be gathering feedback throughout the entire process as to how it's going, how effective it is, how effective the school and the center-based program are integrating, just all of those important pieces as we continue to go along to see if this is something that would be feasible as a way of addressing capacity in the future.
And I know Director Ray had more questions, so.
If I may, just to a quick follow-up on that around capacity, Superintendent Kane, could you give us a very quick summary. I know you answered the question for the board, but for others here, what the capacity looks like in the Parker area, both in terms of number of AN programs, number of severe special need programs, and the projections in that area, because I think that's goes into this formula as a very significant piece, as a pressure relief on what has been trending in Parker. And I know personally, we've gone from roughly 11.5% of our students that are in those programs up to 12.5% just in this year. So we're seeing growth across the entire district. But if you could talk to the Parker area.
I'm going to hand that question over to Deputy Superintendent Hyatt.
So currently in the Parker region, we have 6 affective needs programs and 17 significant support needs programs. All of those programs are nearing capacity or at capacity issues. As you've heard this evening, there is always a need in the Parker region for additional space in our center-based programs. And that is also true in the Castle Rock region as well. So many of our schools in the Douglas County feeder that also host and support center-based programs very frequently, year by year, are at capacity. And therefore, we are in a position where we have to transport students outside of their feeder areas to other regions sometimes, which is, of course, less than ideal as we try to support our students in the schools that are closest to their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Ms. Hyatt. Director Ray?
Yeah, I have several questions about location. One, to begin with, Mr. Cosgrove, if we were to put a heat map up for the residential areas, say in Crystal Valley or in the Castle Rock region that Ms. Hyatt just referred to, would we see similar heat, if you will, in terms of intensity of development?
Yes, in general, you would. The percentages would be slightly different based on the actual enrollment forecast. The nuance about Crystal Valley, the Canyons, and Sterling Ranch, though, is that in Crowfoot Valley, so far we have been able to reboundary our way out of the emergent issues. For example, Cobblestone's already been reboundaried once, and Franktown, Mountain View, and Northeast. Whereas in Crystal Valley, because it literally extends all the way south to county line for our attendance area, there's really not much more rebounding we can do because we've already reboundaried almost every school in the Douglas County High School feeder. So it's geographically separated, and that's in particular the same with the Canyons and Sterling Ranch. So the percentages may be different, but because of the geographic separation, that's what's also driving the need for that new construction, and that's why those 3 schools were prioritized in the bond, slightly over Crowfoot Valley. If we were going for a larger bond, then staff would have recommended Crowfoot Valley included as well.
So Crystal Valley tipped the scale because of the boundary. We weren't able to come up with other solutions.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in large part because of the boundary, but also because of the fast growth in Crystal Valley as well.
Okay. My other question, kind of for Dr. Edwards and then also for the Long Range Planning Committee, but the decision to plant Lehman 2.0 in your backyard, I think comes up in terms of why not, go further out than just in your backyard?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think there are a number of benefits, although, initially it was, being fairly open to where the needs would be. And also, we weren't sure initially what the interest back would be. But because our current campus has a wait list of over 600 for this year, and we purge it every year, and that survey of a replication, in the 85% Parker broadly and then 15% Castle Rock, it did kind of show that's the line. And so in our replication application, we identified the Crowfoot Valley corridor, thinking of that's where our community that's taken time to come on a tour and expressed interest in wanting to put their name and their scholar's name on a list, really represented that area. And then the benefits that kind of came next would be, as we talked about with, the replication questions, was that a strategic ratio of our current staff could have leadership opportunities, with team leads and instructional coaching of a campus that's so nearby. It would be logistically very smart to combine, in-service days and pre-service training and new teacher induction, put them all together, going through the similar training, provide supports to both, even substitute teachers, both campuses being so close like that. So the more we thought about it, and then also siblings, with perhaps siblings at both campuses who have children with more significant needs could have that opportunity very close by for those families. So yeah, as we began to analyze it, it did seem to present even more benefits than we had initially recognized.
Yeah, thank you. And then just a follow-up again, with the location theme. One of my objections for the Parker area has been the ratio of neighborhood schools to charter schools. And it seems like something that we haven't really brought into our long-range planning process is to really discuss that as a filter. I shared with you a couple meetings ago that with Lehman 2.0 in the Parker area, we basically have 43% of the schools in the Parker region are charter, and I think 57% are neighborhood schools. And I think Superintendent Kane was really the first one that I really heard that really said, we're really looking at a ratio of like 75 to 25. When we look at that perfect portfolio, that perfect way of having both non-charter and charter schools in a geographic area. And so I think that's the concern that I have with this location, is just that we haven't really discussed that much, that oversaturation, if you will, of charter schools in the Parker region. And that's why I was asking the question, why not look at a region that doesn't have that ratio? And why? And if this indeed is going to be a precedent that we start setting, is I feel like we need to have that as a filter when we're having conversations about where to locate charter schools. We need to look at that balance and that ratio. So I don't know if that's a question as much as it's just a comment and a concern in terms of this. I appreciate Dr. Edwards, your rationale. Very excited that you're very excited about having students with significant needs come to your school. I guess my other editorializing, if I will, is that there's some conditions around climate and culture that are equally essential for center-based programs as the space. And so I'm a little bit hesitant when I see everything is about space and numbers, that we really haven't gone into depth about that culture and climate that's necessary to ensure that a center-based program really is successful. Having opened a couple of schools where we started out with center-based programs, they're just a whole different way that you work with your community and your culture, in your climate and your culture, to make sure that all students are feeling included. And so I'm a little bit hesitant when I think about us just kind of inserting 2 classrooms without really doing a lot of footwork to say, how do we ensure that programming really is successful for all kids? So it isn't just these 2 classrooms down the hall that have students with significant needs, that really it is an integral part of that learning community. So
I'm going to take the first one because I think that's a little easier, the one about location. I think one of the great things about this is you as a board and us as a district have an opportunity to drive the conversation when we're providing the land. As you know, if it's just a straight, you're approved to open a charter school, their ability to locate anywhere they want to is what it really comes down to. And our ability to step in and say, we'd like to control this a little bit by saying, we'll give you a parcel of land in a place that really affects our enrollment and affects our ability to serve kids. I think that's something that's really attractive for us, and I'm sure it is for you as well. If the decision is around wanting to say 75-25, I can assure you that number might be what you want to see happen, but I think it would be a real challenge, because I think a charter school would say, I'm going to go where I think I can go get kids and where I can get land cheaper than what we can actually provide. So I think that might be a great conversation moving into the future, but as you know, once a charter is approved, there's really 2 paths they can take. One, the district can work with them around trying to help them locate a place, and the other one would be around, you can go find land wherever you need to. And I think there probably would be some opportunities for land in places that we wouldn't want them to be, because I think it would severely impact our long-range planning. Did you want to do the second one?
Yeah, so I'd like to just start a little bit about the climate and culture aspects of center-based programming. I think you are definitely spot on, Director Ray, in terms of that being a critical element to the success of the programming. And it's true even in our neighborhood schools when we are in positions where we have to make decisions to transition programs from one location to another. It definitely is a collaboration with not only the building leaders, but the whole school community as a whole. In this particular situation, we are a year and a half out from actually the start of the center-based program. We still have not made any decisions because we would like to engage with the community fully in regards to what kind of center-based programming makes the most sense based on our needs. I would also say that while I am so thoroughly appreciative of Lehman beginning this partnership in a new sort of way with us, it will not solve our center-based programming challenges in the Parker region. So there's still definitely a lot of work to do. But I do think Principal Edwards, we've had some conversation. He knows the climate and the culture of his building the best. And his receptiveness to be so collaborative and so fully engaged in what this might look like for our students with significant support needs is a very strong indication of the path forward, and I'd like him to comment a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, you pretty much said what I wanted to say, but I think that that's a great point. And I remember you and we connected because you had opened 2 or 3 schools as well. And so I personally would really love guidance on that, Mr. Windsor, Gordon, as others as well. But, you know, we haven't really engaged any community because the location of this replication is not yet determined by you. And so once, if and when that were to be set, then we could begin holding more targeted information sessions, being very transparent with all the families who may want to enroll, really trying to share that vision and the beauty of what this could incorporate. And the same for staff. You know, every staff member that would choose to be part of that replication they would be able to really understand that and know what they're committing to. If I could, I just want to share our 8th grade group at our current campus. We had, I think it was 23% of them, so almost a quarter of our 8th graders with an IEP. And our 8th grade test scores on the state test for writing outperformed the state and district average on every subcategory of writing, which is teachers and school leaders will say is the hardest to teach. And so I think that just speaks to the culture, the climate of care and support from our staff as well, and as well as the curriculum. The classical approach should really be for every single learner.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. And we're past time on this, but expect to see this item for our next meeting come up for a vote. Again, we're talking about land in exchange for weighting, both for special needs and geographic weighting, and also for the hosting of the CCB. I'll sum it up. It looks like Mr. Farland wants to say something, but I'll give a quick summary and I'll let him, I'll let you go first.
I just want to tell all of you as directors that the staff that we have worked with has just been fantastic and cooperative, and we've tried to be the same. And I think you should know it. You got a great set of people here. Thank you.
Thank you, and you just stole my thunder. For those that are listening in, this is, in my mind, my short time on the board, a model partnership where both the district and our partners come to the table saying, this is what we're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? And both sides asking, how can we help to achieve mutual vision? So for anybody that's listening and paying attention and taking notes there at home, especially our other folks, this is what a model partnership looks like. So thank you to Mr. Farley, Dr. Edwards, Kate, everyone on the Lehman team. And again, shout out to our folks, Mr. Cosgrove, Mr. Windsor, Mr. Mosier, of course, everyone on our side for modeling what a successful partnership can look like. So thank you. And we will move to our next item, item number 8, which is presentation of superintendent's proposed approach to the Board of Education, January 25th, 22, resolution concerning DCSD's culture of individual excellence and inclusion. This will be a 10-minute presentation followed by a 30-minute Q&A.
Hi, good evening. You know me and my desire for a handheld mic.
So I'm going to go through the superintendent and my team, our proposal for how to address the resolution that was approved by the Board of Education in January of 2022. Just as a reminder, this was the resolution concerning the district's culture of individual excellence and inclusion. And this is the now therefore it be resolved part. So the Board of Education directs the superintendent to recommend potential changes to board policy ADB and related implementation consistent with the principles set out in the whereases and the school district's mission, vision, and ends. These recommendations are to be presented no later than September 1st, which we spoke about at the last meeting. The Board of Education reaffirms its commitment to providing all individuals the opportunity to participate and benefit from the school district's programs and to ensure that every student has the opportunity to reach his or her individual potential and pursue their chosen endeavor in society. Consistent with this commitment in Colorado and federal law, the school district shall offer and afford every student and staff member equal access to educational opportunities, regardless of their identity, including skin color, ancestry, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, religion, national origin, marital status, disability, socioeconomic status, and eligibility for special education services, viewpoint, or perspective. So the superintendent resolution response plan. First of all, in order to sufficiently gather feedback from our stakeholders on the implementation of policy ADB, we would propose coming back to you on March 31st, 2023, so that we can engage in this work over the winter and the spring. We would like to engage with stakeholders on the interpretation of the policy and the implementation of the policy, and create a superintendent regulation. Essentially, right, your superintendent regulations are the way that I communicate back to you my interpretation of your policy and my implementation plan. And so that would be done in conjunction with all this feedback, including, of course, the Equity Advisory Council. So again, that would include superintendent's interpretation, the procedures that define how the policy is implemented. And given our community and how actively engaged our community is in this work, we would also I would want to specify as part of that, based on all the feedback, what our implementation will look like and what it would not look like. And present that to you in the March meeting, the superintendent regulation and implementation plan. And then per the resolution, if there is any language that through all of that feedback, we recommend making modifications to, we certainly would come back to the Board of Education to let you know that. But of course, policy, setting and changing policy is the job of the Board of Education. Consistent with Executive Limitation 3, the superintendent is asked to provide feedback and suggestions where needed. So what would our engagement plan look like? Well, let's start with the questions that we would ask our community. What does our community want to see happen with this policy in terms of its implementation? Specifically, what things would you like to see implemented? What are you fearing in terms of the implementation of this policy? And what questions does our community have regarding this policy? So then the next question is, who would we engage? And in that time frame, so again, the winter and spring, we would engage, of course, with our Equity Advisory Council, who's already done a lot of really great work, in particular around the area of hiring and making sure that we are hiring in a manner that is very inclusive. We would also engage our EAC membership applicants and public commenters from our EAC meetings. So since the Equity Advisory Council has been instated, we've had a number of folks who are very interested, public comment or participate. This last go round with membership, I believe we had 128 applicants. Did I get that right? So we had a number of people that did not get selected. So we could engage with that group as well. We would engage, of course, with our student advisory group, our district accountability committee, our district leadership team who could share feedback from their individual buildings and their school staff. We would engage through surveys. In our secondary schools, we would help have our leaders facilitate some discussions with students so that the students are talking to trusted adults. Community forums, we would offer an in-person and virtual forum, as well as meeting with community groups, and we will have our Equity Advisory Council help us identify what community groups would be great to engage with. So that would be our general engagement plan, and just gathering feedback on those 3 questions from those various groups. We would compile all of that feedback. Based on all of that feedback, build an implementation plan and interpretation. So the next steps, of course, would be for us to engage in all of that work. But the next steps for the Board of Education would be a vote on September 27th to extend the deadline to March 31st so that staff has the time to go engage our stakeholders. And I also want to make sure I note the policy is in place today. And it really is important to note that the work of equity happens every day in our district as we constantly strive to meet the needs of every one of our students and per the mission of our school district. So that work is going on every single day. But we want to make sure that we get the feedback from our community as requested by the Board of Education and bring that back to all of you. So that is our plan. I'm happy to take questions, and I believe Mr. Reynolds will help me answer questions as well.
Directors, 30 minutes for questions. Director Weiniger.
I just have a question on, since we didn't necessarily have to vote to extend the deadline for this month, can we just, do we still have to vote to extend it for the March one, or is it just kind of, we come to an agreement? Just a semantics question, I think.
I think the answer is the official deadline will be presented to us in the next meeting to vote to extend basically the deliverable from the superintendent around the original resolution. Does that answer your question? We will have to take a vote to do that
Still have
next,
to,
yes,
okay.
next
I was just
meeting.
curious if it's needed or not.
Initially, a resolution was presented to change that deadline, but the Board of Education decided to simply take a straight, clean vote to extend the deadline. So certainly that works.
Okay.
Other directors? Director Ray.
Just for clarification, we didn't extend the deadline, we waived the deadline. We said there was not an expectation for you to present to us in that date that was in the resolution. So that was waived, which kind of leads into some, I have a lot of thoughts and questions. I guess I'm trying to think how to organize my thoughts to kind of make it make sense. So I'm going to kind of go with some of the slides that you just presented. I guess my first thought, Superintendent Kane, is I think the resolution has put you in a very difficult position. And I just want to acknowledge that because for several reasons. It's put you in a difficult position because this is such a hot topic. It was certainly a topic that our former superintendent felt was some of the reason that he was terminated without cause. It was a topic that the majority of our building leaders sent us a communication that said, please just keep the policy as stated and do not change that. I think it's a uniquely challenging position for you because before you were superintendent, you came and asked for a waiver from this policy, which I think also puts you in an awkward spot because there's kind of that bias, maybe, if you will, and that maybe is too strong of a word that you've already had regarding this policy. So I first of all just want to acknowledge that I think the way the resolution is worded puts you in a difficult spot. The other reason I believe is because it's asking you to do our work. It's asking you to go and get feedback from the community to come back and tell us if there's potential changes that should be made to our policy. And you're right, there's an executive limitation that speaks to that for policies that are delegated to you. This policy is not delegated to the superintendent. This policy still sticks under the authority of the board. And I think there's probably 300, I think I counted, 313 policies in our district handbook, and there's 184 that are delegated to the superintendent, and then there's 129 that remain under the authority of the board. And this is one that remains under the authority of the board. So I think for all those reasons, I just want to acknowledge that I think we've put you in a very awkward spot. That said, I do believe there is worthiness for us to ask you to monitor implementation of policies. I think that's what the policy governance structure is intended to do. So we can direct you to monitor the implementation, which, interesting enough, is a lot of what you're suggesting you want to do. We've heard time and time again that it's not the policy, it's the implementation that causes people to have concerns. And I think the other issue that we've created from this resolution is that there's this anticipation that something's going to happen to the policy. For instance, on this slide, you have, what do you want to see happen with this policy? And I liked what you editorialized. You said, what do you want to see happen with the implementation of this policy? And I would really suggest that that wording be up there, because I think this question causes people to go, what are you doing with the policy? Are you going to come back and tell the board that you need to change this wording like you did when you were a director of a charter school? And I think that's what causes a lot of the angst. I think it causes our Equity Advisory Council angst, because we certainly heard from them that said, they're kind of like, they're sitting out there on the edge waiting for the other shoe to drop, because they're wondering, is there going to be this big change of language in a policy that is the board's policy? So with all that, I will be suggesting, certainly when we have a chance to take action, is that we change some wording to really be clear on what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to monitor the implementation of this policy. We're not asking you to go out and ask the community, what do you think of this policy? And I will bring it back to the board and tell them here are some things that they should change. I mean, it would be just the same as if we were to ask you to take out our policy B section, of code of ethics, and we would say to you, go out and talk to the community and come back and tell us what we should change on our code of ethics. It doesn't make sense, because that's our policy. It's not your role to do that. Your role is to do exactly, though, what you're suggesting, and that is to collect data, to look at how this policy is being implemented, to come back and report to us how that has occurred. And I think this whole March 31 even sets us up for another point of stress. We should put this as part of our monitoring reports, just like we have done with all our other ends, as opposed to giving you this very specific time to come back and suggest potential changes to a policy that's not your policy to give us change, to recommend. So I'm just spouting a lot of stuff out there. I don't expect you to respond. I really put it out there for my colleagues to help you understand that I think we're putting her in a difficult position, number one, and number two, I think we can change some of the wording and take some of the angst that we've had from this policy since November to really put it back into the focus on implementation, as opposed to the focus on, are we going to do something with this policy by March 31st? Because I just don't think that's what we are after. So I'm going to stop there. I do have some other questions, but I just want to kind of give that as an overview of some thoughts and reactions that I have. So.
Other directors? Director Meek?
Thank you, Director Ray. I pretty much agree with everything that you just said. And, our educational equity policy exists, correct? Mm-hmm. It's in existence, and it's a policy. I think we need to be monitoring that policy. And I think what you have put in place here for your engagement plan and creating a regulation is exactly what you should be doing as a superintendent. And so I think that work is needed and highly desired. And I just think there's so much confusion in the community. Like, we don't have an educational equity policy, but we actually do. and it's in effect. And I would like to know if there are violations. You know, I'd like to know what's happening with that policy. And that kind of feedback to us would allow us to take action and make needed changes. So I've heard you speak to the media, and when asked, you know, you've said the policy is very broad in nature, and the real work that needs to happen is around implementation and interpretation. And that's exactly what you should be doing. And so I agree with what Director Ray said. I think our ask isn't around extending a resolution. It is asking for a monitoring report on this policy that exists today. I think making that kind of change will add clarity to the community and allow people to understand what really is in effect right now and what's happening. So I do think that's what our next step should be. It should be asking for a monitoring report and setting a date on that so we can take action as a board. But for your engagement plan, I wonder if the Douglas County Special Education Advisory Committee should be added to that as well, because I think that's a really important committee to be engaged through this process.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is policy is good, policy is necessary. We have a policy governance model. But at the end of the day, if implementation doesn't meet the intent of the policy, one, that is potentially on the superintendent for not complying with the intent of policy, or two, it could be on the board for not providing clarity for the superintendent to align her implementation with. And that's always been my, as one director, my concerns with the current policy as written is I believe, you know, I know Director Meek likes to talk about wing flaps. How do we measure? How do we monitor? How do we quantify the success? So as Superintendent Kane goes out there and does this engagement, and I agree, we eventually need to arrive at a monitoring report. At the end of the day, all of our policy is meaningless unless it is implemented in accordance with our intent. So I think that putting together, if you could go back, I'm sorry, to I think it's slide 3. There we go. Thank you. Putting together an implementation plan is what I'd like to see first and foremost. What does it look like to the superintendent, and not the superintendent as an individual, but what does it look like to the superintendent based on the feedback from all of those stakeholder groups? Because I'm sure, or I would expect as one director, that implementation plan would reflect the diversity of stakeholder opinions. I specifically, I'm sorry, now I'm going to ask you to go forward. I specifically really like the questions there. What do you want, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, what do you want this policy to achieve, both in terms of policy, our intent, and the actual implementation, the real world interpretation of that policy? And that's where I have taken personal issue, because as I have talked to different groups, what I've actually seen is there's a lot of alignment, in my opinion, on what people hope to achieve. Where I've seen a lot of friction in our community is around the second question. What don't you want it to achieve, or what are your fears? I've heard everything from the podium. You want to cancel Black History. I don't believe that's the desire of this board. You're going to cancel Talented and Gifted, or you're going to cancel Class Rank because other districts have done it. I don't think that's the intent of this board under the name of achieving some type of uniform outcome. I don't believe that the policy dictates that. So I actually like the resolution as written, because I think it gives, first and foremost, the superintendent an opportunity to develop something we really need, which is a very clear, very concise implementation plan. I think that will assuage the fears of many people that are concerned. And then I think, and I will agree with Director Ray, the policy setting is definitely belongs to this board, not to the superintendent. And then I would think as a group of 7, we would reflect upon that implementation plan. And I get it's a little bit of the cart before the horse, but if that's what the community is inspecting, and that's what the superintendent is communicating back to us, that all these stakeholder groups, these are their expectations, both in the affirmative and the negative, then we as a board can deliberate on that, and as a group of 7 then decide, do we need to clarify our policy to make sure, personally I'd like to see some metrics in there, to make sure that alignment and policy are aligned and absolutely clear and suitable for metrics. So I don't want to push our work over in the superintendent, but I would like to collaborate with the superintendent on this and, as a board, collaborate with all of those groups up there and go forward. I've spoken too long. I will come back, and if I have time, I will ask about the surveys and the targeted groups, but I want to give other directors an opportunity to weigh in with questions or comments. Director Myers.
So I remember back when we were in December of last year, I believe we had discussion regarding this, and I know that it kept pushing about implementation, and I personally know that the reason that we came on board and we became part of this board is I think there were people in the community that were concerned about the actual writings of the equity policy. And so I know with these who and how will we ask, I'm now on the student advisory group, on the district accountability. I loved being out in meeting with community groups and community forums, and I think we do need to get out there, engage more in the community and see if this is what they want with this policy and what are their fears. Do we still have that out there, or is our community comfortable with what we're doing? And as I look through some of the policies that are in the board, it leads me to, I looked at board file AC, the non-discrimination equal opportunity policy. Does that go away? Do we still implement that? Is it, I mean, we've still got it posted online. It's still in our, out there. How do they, I mean, I see between this and the ADB policy, some overwritten, redundant pieces that, should these not be merged? I mean, do we need more than one policy? Do we scrap the AC policy? That's my confusion with some of this, and I just feel like coming on board that it would be just very important if we take a look and start getting out. And it's not your job and we are the ones that get out in the community. We have the one-on-ones, the in-person, and we listen. And I'm expecting maybe within the next several weeks we can start. How do people feel about this equity policy? Read it first. And then, because I know that was happening.
So I'm not sure if there was a question in there for
No,
me.
I just
except to just
I
say
like
the policy
this. discussion.
those policies are definitely all still in place for sure.
Okay, okay, so that confuses me because why do we keep similar policies that, I mean, when you started the equity policy, were you looking at the other policy also? Do we have both of them? Are we implementing both of them? That's my question, I guess.
Yeah, I would like to just go out as president saying any policies we have as a board should be implemented. We can differ and we can talk in the future about seams, gaps, and overlaps and conflict and duplication and all that stuff. But my expectation as the board president is we better be implementing every one of our policies. And if we're not, then we have to have a serious discussion as a group of 7 about changing them. So Director Meek, I'll let you go as well.
Right, so all policies are in effect, right? And many of our policies are interrelated to other policies. That's why those cross-references are on the bottom, so that's pretty typical. The way I look at the equity, educational equity policy, it's more of an aspirational statement where we're putting forward everyone is included and valued in the classroom and in the district. The AC policy and most of those other existing policies are more compliance-based and meeting law in different areas. So that's kind of the way I look at those. And then I guess the other thing, we're the ones that would make changes to policies and adjust as needed. And again, I think we have a policy, it's in effect. I'd like to get the metrics, some metrics and some reporting back. If there are people with concerns, I think that's how we alleviate concerns, is actually monitoring the policy to see how it's working, not working, what edits or changes that we need to make. And I think if we seriously believe we have community members concerned, the best thing we should be doing is monitoring it and not kicking it down the road and saying, we'll look at language later. So that's where I stand.
Superintendent Kane, if you want to address the current monitoring.
Sure. One piece of feedback I think I am definitely picking up on is that perhaps I could add a fourth bullet that says something along the lines to what we would ask, that asks something along the lines of metrics. What metrics do you see as being a tell of how this policy, whether it's success or not success? Because that's definitely a conversation that Mr. Reynolds and I have been talking about having with the Equity Advisory Council, as well as what metrics make sense to look like, because certainly this policy needs to be added to monitoring reports. That's definitely a discussion that we have, that we've had.
And to comment on that, I think if you get solid answers for what do you want to see, if they're good, smart type of answers, specific, measurable, in terms of KPIs, and for what you don't want to see, those provide excellent metrics for we're doing these things in quantity and across the board, and we are not doing the things that stakeholders did not want to see. So again, I think this will help us. One other comment, I know we have another agenda item coming up, number 11, which is around Board of Education engagement discussion. And I think this does not have to be a send the superintendent out on our behalf. This can certainly be accompany the staff as board members in these discussions. Certainly we have liaisons to most of the committees up there, but for the small group discussions, community forums, the survey, I would expect our board members to also be involved in that because, again, we have the policy piece in our lane that we need to, frankly, be there. I don't want to hear it secondhand. No offense to the superintendent. I'd like for our board members to hear it firsthand from the community if possible. Other directors' comments, we have about 10 minutes. Director Hansen.
Thank you. Superintendent Kane, I think something that you and I have in common is that we deeply care about the humans that are involved in this process. And there's a lot of personal, there's a lot of deep feelings around this topic. And one of the things that I get very uncomfortable about when I look at our list of who and how will we ask and what will we ask, we are both aware that this process was underway for long before November. This process was underway long before creating the equity policy. The first existing draft was something that was under the works long before I was sitting here. I don't know the exact deadlines, or the timeframes, 5+ years. This wasn't a policy that was just printed off the internet and put in front of us. Every single one of those groups weighed in extensively, and this process has already happened. And I understand there was a massive national movement to look at equity under a different lens, but we're asking we're asking the people that we desperately need to continue to participate in our school district to do the exact same thing that they just did. And I know you've thought of that, and I know you have a plan, but I'd love to hear how we're going to honor the work that was previously done while simultaneously asking them to essentially do it again.
So if you're asking for my view, I think my view of that is really that this is step 2. So you now have this broad policy. So now the question for a lot of those same groups as well as other groups is now let's narrow down that cone to exactly how what the implementation looks like, what those metrics are that would measure success. So it's really kind of narrowing the focus to implementation. That would be my response to that. But of course, again, the policy changes or not are up to the Board of Education as the governing body. But in my view, this is sort of step 2 to make sure that we're considering feedback as we're actually narrowing that cone into what it looks like to actually implement the policy versus writing the policy. Just my view.
I think as a board, I appreciate that. And we can discuss all day long whose responsibility it ultimately is. But I think if we as a group of 7 are not aware of what we're asking our community members to do again. I just think we could run into some problems with having a robust community willing to participate in a process that we really need them to be a part of. So awareness, I think, for us, and appreciation for you for being aware of it as you start the process.
Thank you, Director Hanson. Other directors? Director Ray?
And that's just, I will reiterate again, and again, Director Peterson, I think you understand, but I don't know that you truly get the magnitude of a resolution that says, superintendent, bring back potential changes to a policy. And I just really think we really need to get that clarified for the very reason Director Hanson said. I don't think this should be about the policy, about what changes do you think need to happen to this policy. This needs to be about implementation. And that's where the other questions that Superintendent Kane has presented is right on, because that is step 2. It's not going back and redoing the work about, should we have an equity policy? Do you like the word equity? All that stuff has been done. What we really need to do is talk about the implementation and the fears and the monitoring of what's the evidence that this policy is intact. So I would just reiterate that I think we've got a resolution that is asking the superintendent to do something that's not correct, and that we need to get that teased out for the sake of our community so there's not confusion, because our Equity Advisory Council, they're concerned about this. They feel like they're left hanging thinking another shoe's gonna drop and interrupt the work that they're doing this year. And I think we need to honor them and say, no, your work is to work collaboratively with the superintendent to help monitor implementation and provide the board some data about how that is happening. So I think this will be some good discussion for action at our next meeting, because I think we have an opportunity to get it clear and to make sure there's no room for people to misinterpret the intent. The only other minor suggestion, Superintendent King, I'll make is on slide 4. And I think it kind of goes back to what Director Hanson was saying in terms of honoring the work that was already done. I'm going to call this group the Steering Equity Committee, if you will, but it's the group that actually has met even more than just 5 years. It's the Jack Kronzers, it's the Chris Pages, it's the Mandy Molsons, the Ian Wells. I mean, there's a steering group of people that were so instrumental in moving us forward with putting this policy in place. And I really think they ought to have probably top billing, if you will, to have input in terms of helping monitor the implementation and provide you with some feedback in terms of how it's going. So I would just really advocate for what I would call the equity steering team, I guess. I think they call themselves the equity team for many years. I was a liaison for that for a couple of years, but I would really say that that's a group that really needs to be attended to as well. So.
Director Williams.
So I do agree that we don't want to take away from anything that was done in the past, because there are a lot of people that were part of putting this policy together. So I don't want to take away from that. And I do think that for me, I need more information so that, because it's clear to me that there has been a lot of concern from the community, from all different perspectives, that this policy is or is not written correctly, that the implementation is or isn't good. And so for me, all of this information would be helpful for me to understand, so that if there are changes to the policy or words that need to be doctored, that I would be able to do that knowing that I had the correct information. And I don't feel like I have that right now, which is why I don't want to go in and doctor any policy. I want to continue forward with the way it is, knowing that I'm going to get more information, so that if changes need to be made, that can be done. So that's why I think that this needs to continue moving forward.
Yeah, and I'd just like to address Director Ray's comments. If we can go back to slide 2, please. Oops. There we go. So I don't think anybody on the board, although you can speak up, has any issue with number 2 and 3. We're really talking about number 1 here because the resolution 2 and 3 is just a recommitment to things that this board stands for. So we go back into, I think it's really that top line, if I'm reading you correct, Director Ray, it's that recommend potential changes to the policy. I'm hearing, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that you're absolutely fine with related implementation, because that's, as you've iterated, is squarely in the superintendent's lane. I'm not inclined to not ask our superintendent if the feedback she's getting is involving a lack of clarity in the policy. I personally, and again, just as one director on the outside, and I was not part of the original policy formulation or all that work, I personally still believe that it is overly broad and vague, and I believe our charter as a board is to not have overly broad and vague policies. I would like more specificity. Do not mistake that. That's not to say blow it up and turn it over. Hell, we might even just do an enclosure like we did to our norms, just to say, here's the policy. We just got a great bunch of feedback from stakeholders that said, these are the expected outcomes, these are the desired things that they don't want to happen, and just attach that. I don't know where this is going to lead. Like Director Williams, I took a step back from this and said, I, as one member, do not have enough input from enough diverse groups, and I think that this is going to be a very valuable exercise. In fact, I don't think it could be, I don't think it will be as divisive as people think, because I've seen a lot of leadership out of the superintendent. I've seen a lot of leadership out of our folks that help attend the EAC and direct guidance and things. And I frankly heard a lot of positive things from people that are for it and the current policy, and people that are against it. And I think this actually, if led correctly, could be a very positive exercise, because if we can go back as a board here in March, and that's what's before us here, I don't think the discussion is really, should we have done this, travel back in time, should we change the resolution? I think really the ask for the next meeting is the superintendent has laid out a plan, and the superintendent is asked until March to provide feedback after execution of that plan, and then we will or will not, or we'll decide as a board at that time based on everything that's come back, if we even need to make any changes to the policy. And I'm not saying we do or don't, or there will be minor or sweeping. I just don't think we know as a board without continuing to get that feedback, and that's where I stand. Director Meek and then Director Ray, and we are at the end of this, but I'll
talk
allow
quickly.
it.
So, resolutions are the least transparent, least accountable, and most clumsy governing tool that we can use, period. That's why we have policies. Policies are monitored. The way this is supposed to work, we would get back a monitoring report. We would look at the metrics. We would see what's working, what's not working. We have a policy that is in place right now. Why wouldn't we monitor it? We then have the opportunity to make changes to it. And that's how it works for every policy and every time you're monitoring policies. Like when you get a monitoring report, we're looking at it, are we getting what we need? Do we need to be more descriptive? I mean, that's the way it's supposed to work. So I just don't understand why we're talking resolutions when we have an existing policy we should be monitoring to make sure that we as a board know exactly what is happening in our district. Equity is the work that the district does. I mean, this is what schools do. This isn't anything that new, equity. And what we are doing, though, is asking for a monitoring report where we can look and see, are we getting what we should be, are we seeing what we should be seeing, and then moving forward. And I think the resolution is a huge distraction away from moving forward and just doing the work that we're supposed to be doing as a board.
Thank you, Director Meek, and Director Ray, and if you could be
I'll
quick.
wrap it
Yeah,
up.
thank you.
So what you and Director Williams described and what Director Meek is reinforcing is a monitoring report. The superintendent interprets. The superintendent comes back with her interpretation. She comes back with her operational definitions. She comes back with the implementation plan. That's what a monitoring report does. So it does give you that additional information. We shouldn't, I think the whole notion of policy is too broad is not the right discussion, because we'll never get policy to a place to where every word is wordsmithed in just a great way that everybody walks away with 100% clarity. That's why monitoring reports are put in place, so we can give her the opportunity to interpret it. And then we can say at that point, no, that's not what we intended, or that's not what we interpret this policy to be. That's the beauty of policy governance. So I would just say again, just to reinforce what Dr. Meek says, is that what we're after is a monitoring report. And I would be adamantly against this March deadline, because I just think, again, it makes it feel like another shoe's about to drop. Basically, what we wanted her to do is to do what she does well, and that is to implement and to enforce and to decide if there's gaps and to bring that report back to us. And so I would just again advocate that we allow her to do her job as superintendent as opposed to our job, which is to set the vision and the commitment of the school district.
Okay, and that is if you would like to respond, I see.
I would. All I would like to say is my interpretation of March 31st is that is when staff will come back to the board with our proposed monitoring report, essentially, right? We're giving you the interpretation, not asking anything, just in the same way that we regularly update you. That would be our request as a time frame to do that, so. Or at least get a good draft so that you can give us feedback.
Yeah, and I think what we've heard here tonight is nicely something that we talked about this summer is actually reinstituting monitoring reports across the board are probably a pretty good idea. So my shout out to Casby and Matt Cook and the folks that said you might want to put monitoring reports back in, not just for this policy, but across. So I'm actually looking forward to that work this year by the board and by the leadership. With that, it is, I'm going to call it 6:45. I'm going to round up. We have a 15-minute recess scheduled. So at this point, we will recess until 7 o'clock and then we'll resume. And we are continuing the work study session. We now have item number 9, security and mental health updates, 20-minute presentation, 10-minute Q&A. And Deputy Hyatt.
So this is a presentation or an update that we are very excited to be able to share with all of you this evening. 20 minutes. We are going to work really hard to meet that timeline because you have all done an exceptional job this evening staying on time with the agenda. So it is my pleasure to introduce our safety and security and mental health team this evening that will be sharing some very important information with you. We have Mr. Johnny Grusing, Director of Safety and Security, Dr. Stephanie Crawford-Getz, Director of Mental Health, and Dr. Kelly Smith, Director of Health, Wellness, and Prevention. And what you will hear this evening is collaboration and partnership between these departments. And so with that, let me just kind of set the stage, and this is very much aligned to the discussions you guys have had this evening about ends alignment. So of course, safe, positive culture and climate is one of the board ends, and what you will hear tonight is alignment to the board ends. Additionally, this update will show the alignment to our strategic plan, specifically strategic theme number 1, which is health, safety, and social emotional supports for students, as well as the objectives that live within that theme. Objective 1, enhancing physical and psychological safety and security for students and staff, as well as Objective 2, increasing physical, social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health competency through prevention and intervention efforts. The updates that we are going to give you tonight show the important work that's been done in these areas. And in the theme of monitoring reports, this presentation will give you some important information in preparation for a monitoring report that will be delivered to you for your consideration in the second semester of this school year. Of course, this is also in alignment with our superintendent goal around climate and culture and the system priority of essential skills for success. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Johnny Grusing, and he's going to start with safety and security.
Thanks, Danelle. Thanks for having me here this evening. So we're going to buzz through some of these slides, and on some of these I'll take my time. This one we're going to be quick on. This is who we are. I'm the director. We hired a new deputy director to start the year, a couple security managers, and then we have patrol. That's our armed portion of where we are. This summer, we received a lot of training from Douglas County Sheriff's Office. They folded us in, and they were able to explain to me being new to the job, exactly what my role is as a supplement to them in case we need to be used. But the training was excellent, and they did it all on their own dime. We have dispatch security specialists, and right now we're at 50 of our 60 campus specialists in our schools. So we're still trying to fill those spots. These are some of our agency partnerships. We have a lot of law enforcement experience, even the ones who are unarmed in the schools. A lot of them come from law enforcement, are willing to help us there. I did look up our mission to make sure I got it right for you this evening. And we're going to focus on the first one, which is student, staff, and visitor protection. I see that for us, and as 3 of you know, you sit on my safety committee and have, is that I've been studying for the last year best practices from other districts. And I came in with the prevention mindset, coming from the FBI of trying to prevent bad things from happening. I spend a lot of time in this category with mental health, which we'll talk about. The hardening portion is where we spend a lot of our money, keeping our campuses safe, and the response portion is primarily our law enforcement partners. So I'm not going to go through these. I don't like to read slides, but I have handled a lot of calls from parents and people in the community to say, what are you doing to keep my kids safe? And that means a lot of different things to us after learning from the district. It's not just a single thing. So we are working in partnership, which I'll talk with you about later, about what a partnership looks like. So normally when I present, I love to do pictures. So I think pictures speak a lot more than words. After Sandy Hook, I worked with our profiling unit with the FBI for the next 10 years on how do we prevent awful things from happening. We would go around, look at attacks, and then work our way backwards to say, how could these things be prevented? The FBI was tired of just responding to attacks. So I did some research this summer into what happened with Uvalde and how we as a district could respond. And I didn't just do it on my own. I worked with law enforcement, our mental health, and some of our building leaders as well. So we'll talk about that. When I was in the FBI, I was a little disappointed when they taught me how to defend myself. I thought it would be really cool stuff, but it's very basic. And they say the tried and tested things, the simple things tend to work. And that's what I'm finding out with our safety and security as well. The simple methods normally work the best. And then finally, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. That's Jessica Ridgway. I worked that case for the FBI. That was October 5th, 2012, when she disappeared. During cases like this, when a child would disappear, we as the FBI would go in a lot of people's houses to try to find her. And I would see that awful things happen in the house. And so after studying Uvalde and people being afraid to come to school, I'm like, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think our kids are safer at school than they are at home. So I did some studies. This summer, I actually worked some with our behavior analysis unit as well to make sure my research was sound. These are some of the studies that I looked at, but it's mainly seeing where are kids the safest. And I found this database. It's accessible by the public. It's health and environmental data. I've actually been sharing this with our building leaders. It's if you see they're most unsafe at their house or apartment, which is what we saw in law enforcement. And then next, it's the streets or the cars or those, that's 80%. You work all the way down to next to the bottom, it's all of the schools together in Colorado. It's our elementary, middle, high school, and universities. And they're at less than really 1.8%. So when I'm sharing this with our building leaders, I'm not saying let your guard down. I'm saying the opposite because I thought our guards were up too high to start the year. And for us, it's if a child is going down a pathway of harm towards his or herself, we know where bad things happen. And we're partnering with law enforcement to make sure we can extend safety as far as we can, even outside our school buildings. And I've had a little fun with this. After the summer, I asked the school staff, what are the most dangerous jobs in the country? My stat is down there at the bottom from U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Guess what one of my top 3 are? Teachers think their jobs are the most dangerous in the country. And it's really a lumberjack, And then I tell them that the least dangerous job is being a computer programmer because you don't have to deal with people, right? But then the second least dangerous job is being a teacher. And if you think about it, we have a controlled environment, controlled access, we give them safety training. There's all these things we do not only to keep students safe, but teachers safe. On top of that, I knew I lived in a good county, Douglas County. A lot of FBI agents live down here, and we do our research. But if you look at the counties nationwide, there's 5,000 of them. We're in the top 4 or 5 every year. And this is quality of life, longevity, those sorts of things. So one of the messages I've been getting to our staff is that we are trying to provide the safest place possible for our students, but we already are in a safe place. And that's helping staff to think about their own safety. If you operate from a place of safety, it's easier to keep our students safe as well. Some of the prevention methods that we studied along with Secret Service, the way to prevent violence is to get out in front of it, and that's to do a threat assessment when someone is going down what we call a pathway of harm. So if we talk about this layered approach, the prevention piece starts with the student, singular, and we're looking at that student very closely to make sure that that student is getting all the resources the student needs if harmful thoughts are coming in or harmful actions are coming out. From there, we work to the hardening. I picked Douglas County High School here because it's got a north and south component, which makes it pretty challenging. It's like having 2 high schools at once. But we're doing hardening projects, exterior and interior, that are ongoing. And then finally, our response piece is, again, our local law enforcement. So if you look at the layered approach, we're starting inward and working outward. after studying Uvalde, and even before that, I've known that the key to safety is having doors locked. And talking to some of the parents this summer, they're assessing to make sure their kids are safe in school, and I'm telling our teachers that if they see a door locked, they're figuring that school is safe. And they're actually right, because an attacker has not breached a door. And if we're talking about the worst of the worst, but the very simple things, like I said earlier, are a locked door. I look at a lot of different technologies, but the locked door is the safest place. The locked door is an easy way to keep kids safe. Finally, I attended some legal training this summer, and the professor showed us a bridge of how to get kids from one side to the other. And from the FBI, we formed what are called task forces, to where we don't just work by ourselves to address a problem, we work with other law enforcement agencies. And so what I've been trying to do for my first year is to partner closely with the building admin, with mental health, law enforcement, risk and legal, and especially the parents, and to get students to buy in what we're doing here. With that, I'm going to invite Stephanie to come up and share some with me.
Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it. Well, as you see in our district, we're very collaborative, and it takes all of us to keep kids safe. If you've done our basic trainings, it's all eyes on kids all the time, every single one of us doing our part to do this work for our students. And so I want to just go over some mental health parts and how we collaborate with security and law enforcement. We're also going to talk about prevention as well. And I'm very, very excited to talk about a new position that we were able to create and have started this school year, our psychological safety coordinator. This is a position in which we have one person that can be very dedicated to doing this work alongside with a team of people, including our law enforcement and our security and our schools and our parents and our students. But it's really nice to have some focus in this area besides just our mental health team. This role will be able to really dive in and be that link in our system with our school staff to help them with their thinking, providing consultation on hard cases, professional development, and looking at research and working alongside us to update our procedures and how we are doing this work and how we can further enhance it. So we're very, very excited about this role. As long as we're going into this, professional development is super important. Being proactive and having prevention is the key. So we know, as Johnny said, it starts with individual students and how we're taking care of them and the connections we make. And so we want to make sure we're training our staff on how to connect with students, be aware of signs that a student might be at risk to themselves, they might be having suicidal thoughts or harm to others, how to respond to that, who in their buildings and community are supports to them, and we can link that student and their family to those supports, as well as put in safety plans to really make sure that whatever the issue was, we're meeting the student where they're at, and we're helping to put in interventions to support them, keep them safe in schools, and moving along productively so that they can reach their goals throughout their school career. So we're really excited about that. We're also continuing our work with crisis response. We do have that need. We're a large district, and we do have events where we have students and staff who may die, or we may have large-scale events. That's part of prevention. So any work we do that's called postvention continues that cycle back to prevention, and it's a continuous cycle and fluid process of keeping our students safe. So this role, psychological safety coordinator, will also really be able to help us looking at our data, analyzing our systems, and making sure that we are putting into place any additional systems we need, procedures, as well as additional trainings, and really be there to walk alongside staff in schools when we have really hard, complex cases where they need some support and some additional expertise and a lens in that realm. So we're excited about that. So I'll be excited for our monitoring report in the future as well. And I'm going to hand it back over to Johnny to talk about some updates.
So part of that hardening that I spoke about is county commissioner money. The county commissioners a couple of years ago granted us $6 million to do these types of projects, which are ongoing through the schools. Address this with Superintendent Kane and with my boss, Donnell, about a month or two ago, because some of these we were having trouble getting them off the ground, especially there's one called Bollards there. And we found that that can be done internally. And it was $1 million we could redistribute to things that we figure we could cover all the schools. And that is Superintendent Kane's passion, is that we give all the schools the same safety and security measures, which I totally agree with. So we went from there and pulled from other areas as well. And the training was either nearing completion, like the radios and windows, it was adjusted, or they were like with the Defend training, that's where we paid for all of our 4 jurisdictions to go train for the active shooter stuff. They had done it a couple times, and they felt they got the training they needed. So we moved that money then back into 2 areas, which are the communication systems and door alarms. So that is boosting our radio signals in schools that have really difficult time hearing on the radio, which we find that to be, working with law enforcement, a very critical component. And then door alarms are on our exterior doors. We're working with not only the high schools now, but we're moving that down to our middles and elementaries. So the Board of County Commissioners did agree that this was a good use of funds, and they just now approved it, and we already have these projects underway. I just wanted you guys to know exactly what they knew as well. I do see a lot of new technology that comes through. We address it with a team. It's, again, more the task force mentality, and it has to be now something that covers all of Douglas County schools, and it has to integrate with our system. So a lot of really cool technology is coming through, but if it doesn't integrate well with what we're doing already, we take a pass for now and reassess. We have these ongoing as well with the reunification. We're working on non-district sites as well as district sites. These refining constantly our practices and procedures, and that's why we have a committee that meets once a month, and we are constantly trying to upgrade and do better with safety and security. Stephanie, I think it's back up to you. We're going to take questions at the end once she finishes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our mental health team. And as you've heard me say, we are small but mighty. So we're excited to have that extra teammate so that we can really hit mental health from all aspects along the continuum of being very proactive and preventative, but all the way up to when we have our hardest moments, to walk with students and staff and families through those moments, and everything in between to support students with their needs. And we're very lucky to have a data specialist. This is a person and not an automated system that reviews all our safety reports and can really flag things that need attention by our psychological safety coordinator and myself and Johnny. So it's really great to have human eyes on this information. I want to really kind of talk about mental health in our current state. You've heard a lot about shortages, and while we have our own a little bit as well, we're doing pretty good in our district, and we have really looked at increasing our mental health staff in schools, both counselors, social workers, and psychologists, and especially at that elementary level where it's so important to have full-time support there that we've talked about in the past. I'm also excited that mental health has taken on the animal therapy program as well. We are looking through applications and making sure we're updating procedures to have great therapy animals in our schools and how we can expand that. So I'd love any partnership and collaboration with that. I also want to highlight, we have been piloting our youth community response team over the past few years. That was mainly in the Highlands Ranch area. And that is a co-responder team with a specially trained police officer, as well as a mental health professional that after our school professionals can do their safety assessments, we can call in this team for another layer. They provide assessment, safety planning, case management to our families. And I want to pause and highlight Corey Chance. Can you stand up and can we give him a hand? Thank you, Corey. Corey is one of our community response team members on our youth side. He's been doing this work for a while. He's amazing. I am so proud to get to work with you, Corey. And we are bringing on a second team. We are expanding this district-wide. Now we can provide this service to all the schools in our district, neighborhood charter, as well as our private schools and our community. So this is really exciting. Thank you, Corey. Yes. And I'm also really excited that we started, in February of 2021, our Handle with Care program. This is a very simple trauma-informed program. Just 3 simple words, handle with care. Nobody needs to know why or any details. We don't violate any privacy. We just know this student's had a hard time. When they come in, give them all the love and support that they need, whatever that might be, from resting and food to a caring air, or just letting them have time to maybe take that test another day or turn in their homework late. And I want to really recognize Lieutenant Rotherham in the back here. So thank you, Lieutenant. He is part of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Let's give him a hand. And he has been a wonderful partner with me in getting this off the ground and making sure that these notices go out to our schools each and every day. So we're excited about that. I'm also excited we're in the accreditation process for our school psychology internship program for our doctoral program. This is important. We have a shortage of school psychologists across the nation. And one way to combat that is to provide quality training to them, make sure that they get that great experience in-house, and we keep them. So we've been very lucky. We've always been a program that we have followed the rules of accreditation, but we're actually in that process with UCD and another school district. Once we're accredited, we're super desirable. Many programs will say you must first apply and secure an accredited internship before you do anything else. And so we will have lots of wonderful, high-quality professionals that we will train ourselves and retain with this program. And then I want to talk and hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Kelly Smith. She is an amazing partner with me in mental health, and we couldn't do it without each other. So.
That is correct, Stephanie.
There you go.
All right, thank you. So I'll make this quick. I get the privilege of being the Director of Health, Wellness, Prevention, and I oversee counseling, prevention behavior supports, and nursing. And you'll see with my slides that it really is a universal, targeted, and intensive approach that we're taking within these teams. For our counseling department, we have the privilege of being able to hire a full-time elementary lead counselor this year and a full-time secondary lead counselor, along with a counseling leadership team that's representative of 2 elementary, 2 middle, and 2 high school counselors that have been in our district for a very long time. And they're leading work around creating a comprehensive school counseling aligned program K through 12, with looking at what does every student get at the universal, targeted, and intensive level within a counseling program at every grade. The partnership that we have with our counselors in Denver Springs in our middle and high schools is continuing from last year. It's a grant that we had the opportunity to receive again, and we have 1 therapist in every middle and high school 1 day a week that works on short-term therapy with skill building and alternates to suspension, and then referrals to outside agencies. So they work in conjunction with the middle and high school counselors and support kids that need that specific skill building. We're continuing to build our sources of strength, a fabulous program that's a suicide prevention program in our middle and high schools. We have 14 elementary schools. There's a new K-2 program that just rolled out in July, so we're getting more schools on board with that. And then we have 6 middle schools and 5 high schools. And we're continuing with our donations. We have a lot of community donations to support that program, and it's a wonderful thing to keep going. Our counselors support that in our schools. And then signs of suicide, we're continuing with our grade 7, 9th, and 11th graders, and that's a counselor-supported program as well. We also did some restructuring within our prevention department, and we hired a coordinator. We changed some FTE around and changed a coordinator position to support health, wellness, and behavior support. So we've taken the existing behavior team and embedded it within our prevention team, and have hired some specialist behavior technicians or /coaches and prevention leads with the purpose of providing a unified approach to how we support students with prevention and behavior supports. We look at universal, targeted, and intensive with the focus of collaborating with schools around creating, refining systems to support all students, and then students that need more, how do we identify them, and what interventions can we put in place to support them? And then our idea around embedded coaching, we know that if we get into schools and we coach teachers and students on interventions, we get a bigger bang for our buck than if we're doing stand and deliver PD. So we've moved to that model. The focus of our wellness and prevention behavior support team is to really look at universally what should all of our schools have to support universal prevention when it comes to behaviors and regulation supports. We're looking at positive behavior intervention supports, restorative practices, and trauma-informed. Our prevention leads will be trained to go out and do that professional development in our schools. We also have a very important intervention that we have in a lot of our schools, and we're expanding that, and it's our home base and regulation rooms. I know that some of you have heard about those. We're now taking a baseline of what's really working within those rooms and providing schools that want that program training so that they can open that, along with training the staff that would work in those classrooms. And we're finding a lot of success. It's a place where students who need some of that targeted support around skill building of social skills and behavior regulation can go for short periods of the day to get that intensive instruction around those areas. And then our nursing team, I love my nursing staff. We have a nurse coordinator and 4 nursing leads. And we believe that mental health is health. So we've looked at nursing differently this year, where we're really focusing not on COVID, but on prevention. And we look at our health assistants are taking a training this coming September PD Day on youth mental health first aid so that they can be the first line defense when students visit our health rooms to do a screener to see if they need more supports around mental health. We also have trained all of our nurses in conjunction with Stephanie's team to conduct suicide screenings. All of our nurses have taken a rotation in their training around mental health and have the ability to do that, and we weren't leveraging that well enough. So now we have all of our nurses trained to support our mental health teams. We've moved our Healthy Schools grant that's previously been in the prevention department, our whole school, whole community, whole child, and moved that over to our nursing department because our Healthy Kids Colorado survey data came back and really highlighted that nutrition and the importance of sleep was an area that we could do better in teaching our students. So they're working on those goals within the schools. Our nurses are becoming part of our problem-solving teams, our student of concern teams at our schools. We also, as you know, have Narcan in our buildings as a preventative measure. This year, all of our nurses will be trained in emergency triage training, so it's disaster preparedness. So if we had a disaster event or a mass casualty event, they could be first responders as well. They're also part of the student attendance review board for chronic absenteeism. And then they coordinate student care for any students that have health plans or on IEPs and refer to outside agencies as well. And I'll turn it back over to Stephanie.
Kelly? Okay, so talking about our funds from our county commissioners, here are some highlights of what we've been using. 2 of our main areas is making sure we're providing those universal essential skills in social, emotional, and well-being. So we've really looked at curriculums that building leaders and their teams want to have in their schools. And these are some of the top curriculums that we've vetted and that they really have appreciated having as part of their toolbox. We're excited about SMARTS. It's an executive functioning curriculum. Those are hard to find, and high-quality ones are even harder to find, but we found one. As you know, when we talked last year, we piloted this with our school psychologists and social workers, and now we're going to expand that district-wide to have it in all of our schools. We're also using those funds to help make sure that we're providing that signs of suicide curriculum with Kelly's team and the counselors. And we have used those funds to make sure that we're training our staff and making sure that they are prepared should they encounter a student who might be suicidal, how they can engage with them, keep them safe in the moment, and connect them and link them with appropriate supports and mental health providers. So that's called Question, Persuade, Refer. And then our crisis response is Prepare. That has a new edition, 3rd edition, and so we've been using these funds to make sure we have trainer for trainers in this area, and we can continue to train our crisis team as well as our mental health staff and really look to expand that district-wide as well. So when we looked at originally, a long time ago when we decided what do we want to spend this funds on, this is what we had decided upon originally. We wanted to, as I've said, look at training and social emotional learning, looking at climate and culture surveys through our prevention team, as well as being able to pay instructors and pay teachers to miss school and go get trainings and have subs for them. We've needed to reprioritize some of the funding as we've grown into how things have changed since the pandemic. One thing is we have refocused where we're getting our information for climate and culture. And we've worked with really focusing on our RISE schools. They're part of a grant that looked at their climate and culture. We've continued to do our social emotional learning. With that, interesting enough, cost scope, we want to readjust and reflect current costs. The nice thing that happened as part of this pandemic was trainings. A lot of agencies said, we're going to reduce our prices. We're going to offer things to make sure we can expand. And so that's been a way that we've been able to reprioritize in a different way some of our funding. And then we looked at, I don't think that we're in a position to have our teachers missing school with their kids. So we want to relook at how we're going to train our teachers as well. And what we did is make sure that we're embedding training and coaching in partnership with Kelly's team. How do we do that day to day without asking them to do additional training outside of school hours? And so this is what our new funding is focused on, is really, we've been spending a lot of money on those essential skills that are so important for our students to have and to be able to succeed in school and outside of school, and then continue with those mental health trainings. And this is where we're currently at. We've spent some of our money and we're done in certain areas, and we're continuing to focus on the main areas, and our goal is by the end of this school year, we will have all curriculums in the schools and our mental health trainings that have been prioritized to happen. So we're excited about our goals and what we're going to accomplish this year. And then I want to end with just recognizing that this month is Suicide Prevention Month. And this year, you know, it's important that we have 988. We used to have a long crisis number that you would call or you'd get online, and now you can call or text 988 and get help. So this is wonderful that we have this. And this year for our suicide prevention message, it is be the one to. Be the one to ask that important question. If you're worried, and don't be afraid to ask it, are you thinking about suicide? We need to ask that. It's a good question to ask, and it won't make anyone have those thoughts. Be the one to break down stigma so that we can talk about mental health. And be the one when you're with someone you care about, loved ones, community members, to help them, be with them, and get them support. So I challenge all of us to be that one for our community members. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Grusing and the mental health team. Directors, any questions, comments? Director Meek.
Thank you for the great presentation. I'm curious, has the position for the psychological safety coordinator been hired? Do we have someone in place now?
We do.
Okay.
We hired that person. They were in place July 1.
Great.
So, and it's a in-house person who used to be our crisis team lead. And we also have the crisis team lead role hired, and that person started this week. So we are all hired on my team.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal. It is hard to do in mental health these days.
And then one more real quick. How do you get student voice and student perspective around the mental health piece?
Well, that's incredibly important. And we have a community of vocal students that I'm very proud of. From the day I entered this job, I had students reach out to say, can we have coffee? We want to share our voice. Email me. Our student advisory group is very active, and they always have a mental health committee that my team has been very active on, as well as Kelly's Health, Wellness, and Prevention team. And then we work very closely with the Douglas County Youth Initiative, in which we have done student forums in person and virtual, and we're working on bringing those forums to schools this year so that our students have a voice with district leaders as well as our community leaders and can say, here's what we need and want. And we're going to listen to them because they know very well what they need.
Other directors? Director Ray.
Yeah, just a couple things, Director Grusing. I know that SROs aren't our employees, but in your slide that talks about safety and security, we don't have them listed there. And again, I understand you were just listing our employees, but could you give a quick stat about how many SROs we also have that help promote safety and security in our schools?
Yes, so we have 4 jurisdictions. We have Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and between deputies, corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, 24 to 27. Then Castle Rock PD has about 6, Parker PD about 6, and then Lone Tree 1. But those are just the ones dedicated to us. So just so you know what we're doing for our lockdown drills this year, and some of you have been able to participate, actually lots of deputies come or officers come, so they are used to the schools as well. So those are the ones on paper that we have, but patrol and whatever, they are finally attuned to our schools. But those are the ones we support Director Ray financially as well. We pay 50% of their salary.
And we phased out the school marshal program, is that correct? And now all of these uniformed officers are considered SROs?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. And then the other thing, I think we tend to, we appreciate and we're truly grateful for the Board of County Commissioners grant that they give us, but I think sometimes we forget that our community approved a bond in 2018 for $15 million for security, which really helped, I think, on an annual basis, about $4 million of additional dollars that were for security improvements and security enhancements. I wonder if you could just kind of capture that a little bit, just so that we can also thank our community for that decision as well back in 2018.
Oh yeah, for sure. Those, and we do what are called IGAs, the agreements each year, and that funding allows us to continue our relationship with law enforcement.
So that $15 million that the voters approved in 2018 primarily went to our IGA with SROs.
I'm not for sure. That was before I don't know where all that money went back then in 2018.
Okay, because it's basically, I mean, it's been since that time. Every year it's been a $4 million addition, when in the past our budget was something like $500,000 per year for security, and I just want to shout that out, because I think as we're looking at a bond, we also need to take every opportunity to acknowledge what happens when voters do indeed support additional funding like this situation for security.
Yes, I would just reiterate what you just said, Director Ray. I mean, we are very appreciative of our voters and the bond of 2018, which did allow us the opportunity to implement several different hardening mechanisms in our schools, which I would like not to disclose all of the details of that publicly, but to your very point, absolutely those funds went to critical measures in our schools to help to continue to promote safety and security.
Other directors? Superintendent Kane.
Just to add to what Deputy Hyatt said, so the 2018 bond did indeed go to a lot of hardening measures. I think Johnny mentioned earlier that it's really important to us that all of our schools benefit from those measures, and they did. And a lot of that was cameras and other things that we can kind of talk about out loud that were incredibly important, and not just the equipment, but also the infrastructure to get all of our schools on the same system that all works together, that can work with our safety and security department. So certainly that 2018 bond was incredibly critical, and I'm very glad you brought that up. I would also like to point out that thanks to our taxpayers and the 2018 mill levy override, that is what enabled us to be able to have a counselor in every single school, which of course is also a huge part of our overall strategy that involves all three pillars that Johnny spoke of. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add on that, the draft bond plan for the 2022 bond includes $15.5 million additional spend on security. And back to one of the slides that Director Grusing presented earlier, prevent, harden, and response. And there's so much more than just that physical hardening in systems. When we talk about radios, we talk about the comms and what that does. Those are absolute critical components, not just of the response, but of situational awareness and things. And the other statement he had up there was multidisciplinary threat assessment is the most effective prevention measure. And I'd like to come back and highlight one other thing, that position, which is being filled by Stephanie O'Neill, that psychological safety coordinator, one of those particular tasks is the threat assessment task. And that's not just, potential active shooters. That's really the mental health screen as well, because we will catch so many of our students that are actually not a threat to others, but maybe a threat to themselves. So having that preemptive role in there, and that dedicated role, is a significant enhancement to both our security and our mental health. And that was made possible by the group of 7 directors working in collaboration with our Board of County Commissioners to reprogram some money that was going to go somewhere else and to fund this position and get it up off the ground. Last thing I'll say, because Johnny and his team and the mental health team are too humble to say it, Director Hansen and I have sat as liaisons to the Safety and Security Committee, and what I've observed there is we have a group that is considerate, a group that is deliberate, a group that is collaborative, not quick to knee-jerk and jump to the shiny object or the various gizmos and gadgets that have been presented down there. And they have had folks in from Jeffco, from Denver Public Schools, from Aurora, from all around, and they've sat and listened to best practices and then considered very deliberately, does this make sense for Douglas County? And then only pick those things that are the best bang for the buck, that are going to really improve, push our perimeters out, really improve our results. And that takes an incredible degree of humility to look at other best practices, see where our weaknesses are, and then learn from other people and then improve our system. So I'd just like to make a giant shout out to Johnny, to Stephanie Crawford-Getz, our other Stephanie, Dr. Smith, and everyone that's involved. And the last thing that I'll say around that collaboration is we have our awesome law enforcement partners there. We have experts. We even have a mom of a previous school shooter on that committee to add that perspective, because she does not want to see that type of thing happen again. So it is a absolute multidisciplinary, very varied perspective group. And I can say with absolute confidence that this district is in excellent hands. And we as the board, I would recommend continue to defer to their expertise and continuing to improve constantly our school safety. Superintendent Kane.
Assistant Superintendent Windsor would like to add.
Yeah, I think one thing I do want to add is obviously I think we have an incredible team. I think that is here on a regular basis to access as a resource. But systemically as a system, one of the things I've really appreciated is we've actually tried to embed that work systemically for our leaders to have regular real-time information updates. So part of our district leadership team meeting is really looking at it from month to engage in this conversation. So our leaders have real-time information to engage in this work, to be able to learn from our leaders. I know Director Grissing and team has provided sessions for our leaders this past month as well, and we'll continue to provide that throughout our system on a regular basis. So all leaders, including directors, principals within the district, get access to information on a real-time basis.
That's excellent. We're kind of nearing the end of our questions. I want to open up for other comments and questions from other directors. Director Wright, go ahead.
Just a quick clarification, just so that we don't have a public snapshot. We don't have a parent of a school shooter on the committee. We have a parent whose children were involved in a school shooting. She wasn't a parent of a school shooter.
Yes, she was.
Okay.
We have both.
So when I was on the committee, I was only familiar with the parent of the school shooter. That's interesting. All right. I stand corrected. That's very curious. The other thing I want to just point out is, and I think both you and Dr. Crawford really said it well, is that with the funding, the Board of County Commissioner funding, we also were very responsive to the needs of the time. And I say that because I know we got a lot of concern from the community about why aren't you spending this $6 million tomorrow, as opposed to why did it take so long to expend the dollars. And I really appreciated the highlights in your presentation to say, if we had done that, we would have missed some opportunities like adding another youth response team, because that all of a sudden became more of a need for us than maybe the other things we originally thought we needed. So I just wanted to highlight that and thank you for pointing that out, because I think there's been a lot of stuff out there in terms of criticism about whether or not we should have spent that money sooner or not.
Thanks, Director Ray.
Yeah.
Any final comments, Director Grusing?
Nothing. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, and hand for all of our safety and security team. All right, moving on to the next presentation, we have turnover and hiring data. I believe we will have Ms. Thompson. We ran a little over, so we'll give you 5 minutes. No, I'm kidding. This is a 15-minute presentation and a 15-minute Q&A.
And I can catch us up too. No problem at all. Thank you for this opportunity. It's nice to be up here again sharing about this information. It's been a bit, so look forward to this regular cycle of reporting out. Of course, it's important to ground the work in the why to make sure that we are all aligned in our purpose and what we do and why. So, of course, board end statements on ensuring that we're recruiting, developing, retaining, and so forth. Our superintendent goals also center around, over time, improving our organization turnover. And then, of course, we have strategic plan themes that relate in these areas as well. Positive and supportive culture and around the recruitment, retention, and development of our employees. You'll see two different calculations this evening of data. The first data set is through CDE. That's through our annual reporting. And it's a little bit different than what you'll see later in how we calculate the Douglas County data. The difference is with CDE, it takes a head count snapshot from December of 1 year. So you're in one school year to December of another school year. So it's not a true clean school year, but it toggles between 2 school years. It's all employees. It includes our charter schools as well. And turnover is considered through CDE a job change, a promotion up, or leaving. And know that for teacher turnover, you'll see in a minute, it separates out particular parts of our licensed groups. Here is some historical turnover as it relates to DCSD. And you'll see some other charts and other ways to look at this data as well. Notice along the top blue area, it says, for example, 2021 turnover rate is representative of the data from December of 2020 to 12 of 2021. We will not receive a snapshot of 2022. We're starting that reporting now. And we begin that, the 21 to 12 of 22, that comes up. So you'll see that in 2023, and we'll bring you back that data. So overall, the state totals at the bottom are for all employee groups. And you'll see ranges, for example, currently for administrators at 12.5%. That separates out, that's district level administrators. You'll see an anomaly here in our 1920 or reporting 12 of 18 to 12 of 19 at 71.4%. That is when Douglas County, in order to align with state reporting, moved our admin out of a particular group and into ProTech. So we further adjusted to make sure we are in alignment with other districts because at that time we were not. So that is that odd blip in the data. Overall, you'll see that we're pretty stable over time, for example, in crafts, trades, and services when we split among school years. Also in office admin support at 20.1%. Other support, no, those are our SSP friends, so our psych social workers, et cetera. Notice that, yes, we do see paraprofessionals at our 27%, and we do see some upward trends overall. More data coming here in the next slide. So we've color-coded it out, and this is, again, reporting from December of 20 to December of 21. The orange represents that we are higher in our turnover rate than the state average. The green indicates that we are lower than what is listed as the state average. So overall, as we compare to the state, we're doing pretty well. I will say it's not surprising in crafts, trades, and services. We'll go into more detail as we dig into the data further on in this presentation. We're struggling with pay rates for a lot of our employee groups. Overall, it's interesting to see that we score, our rates are pretty comparable as we look at, for example, 18.4% with instructional support compared to all other school districts, and also at 20.1 in office admin support, and especially with our principal group at 12.4. So again, that calculation with the state is that there wasn't a lot of movement up, side to side, or out. And overall, quite interesting data as you look at all of our school districts scoring within, scoring is not the right language to use, percentages of turnover in the 19-20% range from one another. So we're pretty comparable to our neighbors, Creek, Aurora, and Jeffco. This is just another way to look at this information. Just put it in a line graph. Again, remember those 12 of one year to 12 of another. It reports out the year after. So Dougco, we are the red. The state is that bright blue line. And overall, in the later part of our years here in reporting out, from about 2018 on, we remain lower than our state average. And we're also starting to fall within similar ranges to school districts, and we are all in that upward trend right now. Not surprising with labor shortages and et cetera. This just isolates particular groups of employees within DCSD over time. So we have our teachers in blue, our principals, and all staff. So again, here is some trend data. I'm sure we can all, kind of look back and know what was going on in 15, 16 to get us to 17 as we look at December to December. And again, further data here further down in these slides, you'll get to see how we are making improvements, but there's definitely an explanation for the upward trend. Douglas County turnover, so we take our neighborhood non-charter schools, because that is the hiring that we have control over in HR and amongst our school leaders. And all licensed staff include teachers and our SSPs. We do exclude our charter employees and any temporary employees, because those are positions for health reasons that get filled or temporary class size increase or relief, et cetera. And this goes from July 1 to June 30. So this is a clean school year. Special thanks to Matt and to his team and to the IS team and Team HR for helping put all of this data together. So as we look at school year 17-18 to all the way to 21-22, we do see some interesting data. It's important to point out as you look at school year 21-22, a couple of things. This data set does include our regular positions, including the ones that are not filled yet. So kind of taking all positions into consideration. 12.8% looks like a very high number, but our end size is very small. So overall, as we look at that information, that represents 22 people. Whereas if you look at a classified group, you're looking at a couple hundred. And so of those 22 people, we had 6 principals that retired and 4 assistant principals that retired out of that group. And later data will show that we are seeing more retirees coming forward than typical. Anything else you want to add, Matt, about this? Okay. Now we broke it out by actual numbers of people. Again, of the 8 and 14 assistant principals, 10 of those were retirees. And then you'll look at our licensed group. So we're within similar ranges over the last couple of years. Our classified numbers remain similar, and really not a ton of change except when you look at our assistant principals. And we'll look at some reasons for leaving here in a minute as well. Here it is. So these are the main reasons for leaving. The dark blue represents a data set that as we reviewed the information, it alluded to people looking for jobs that could offer more pay. And that we've talked about over time. So whether it's personal reasons, career changes, family reasons, better pay, career advancements, going elsewhere, and we do have situations where candidates just decline. We are not able to offer enough for those positions. This combines all employee groups. It's important to also see that number of retirements, around 168, and I'm sure you can recall back when we went to that great retirement ceremony, those were higher than normal numbers that we've seen in the past. So all of the blue again represents the individuals who are leaving due in part to pay. And we have made great strides, and we need to continue to make great strides. On to hiring information. So this information represents all regular positions with a July 1 start date. Again, not temporary positions like coaches or our charters, since we don't hold a lot of that specific information. So, for example, we had 10 administrators new to DUGCO. 6 were returning, which is a wonderful celebration. And there were 47 position changes. That means they took a different position, whether sideways from, this department to that department, or whether it was from that building to this building, so a building switch. And we currently have 2 open positions in that area. ProTech, again, there's the data, how it breaks down. We had some internal movement, total of 11 hires as of when we turned this information in. Licensed, 289 new to DUGCO. So we welcome them. We're glad that they have joined us. 87 have returned back home to Douglas County. And that's a total of 376 hires. We had a lot of internal transfers. We had 665. That could be first grade to second grade in the same building. That can be their 0.5 shifted from, shifted subject areas. That could be shifting to a different building or a completely different position. And we currently have about 48, but as we speak, those are in process right now and in different parts of the hiring and review process. And then in the classified realm, again, 247 new hires, and we have about 300 open positions of every kind of classified job type, whether it's in transportation, in our buildings as paraeducators, all over. One point of celebration that's not on here, and I'm sorry I didn't add it, of our licensed staff, 66 of them were students with us back in the day and are now teaching with us. So we are so happy to have them. And I recall seeing those wonderful people and our wonderful teachers at New Teacher Orientation. Some other interesting and celebratory information. When we looked at who lives with us, that works with us, or lives in our area, 72% of our employees, all employee groups, charters included, live in Douglas County. So we are so glad that they live and work in the same area, and 28% currently do not. We want to see that number go up even more. And we want to make sure that our employees are able to be paid at rates where they can afford to live here in DUGCO. A last bit of licensed hires and how they break down. So we ask our employees, our new hires, a survey, what brought them here so that we can learn more about them, helps advise us where we recruit. Interesting information that we have, for example, 24 that came to us from Cherry Creek. In fact, one of the wonderful individuals that joined us from there has kids who live here, and it's been her goal to live here and work here for many years. So it was finally the year for her to do that. 86 are out of state, and we'll look at that here in a moment. And then overall, we're seeing just a handful of people from around the metro area that chose to come to DUGCO, and we are so thrilled about that. This is exciting for us here in HR as we figure out where we need to recruit from. Yes, we recruit locally, but we know that candidate pools continue to diminish, and other districts are experiencing that as well. And so it's important that we recruit from out of state, and this helps advise us as where. So the darkest, the navy blue states, are where we recruited the most individuals from. It's not surprising over time. This has been this way, I would say, for the last 5+ years. California, we don't go to particular recruitment fairs there at this time, but they still come our way. And also in Texas, we do go to a few job fairs in Texas that many school districts do, and we continue to, and yield great results. And that's interesting, even though that they do tend to pay higher and offer really great hiring incentives. Part of that reason is, as we are looking into it, is that they have family here or they are returning back here and once lived here. They like the lifestyle and they like the location of Douglas County and the lifestyle that it brings. And looking back at Mr. Grusing's report, that would make a lot of sense. And the gray areas indicate places that we have not yielded hires. We went to a job fair in Oregon, so this would tell us we don't need to go back there and we should focus all of our time in these other places. Our East Coasters tend to love our weather more. And when we go recruiting, sometimes they think it snows a ton here, and actually it's sunnier than the snow that comes to Colorado. One hire from United Kingdom and a few from Hawaii. And my last slide is, this is a breakdown of our employees and their years of service in Douglas County. So, interesting to see that almost 4,000 of our employees have been with us less than 5 years. And then 5 to 10 years, and then about almost 2,000 greater than 10 years. One, we do have people that are retiring, so that would attribute to some of the lower numbers over with our beautiful large tree. Thank you, Jan from Communications, for your graphic talent. And then this would tell us, yes, we are glad that we are hiring new people, but again, there needs to continue to be a focus on ensuring that we can recruit and retain the very best. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Director, questions or comments? Go ahead, Director Ray.
Thank you.
Sure, my
First of
pleasure.
all. The slide that you had that showed new positions, I think it was near the end, yeah. How does that, Ms. Thompson, compare to a year ago, 21 to 22?
New to DCSD?
This hiring data, if we were to create a slide for hiring data for 21, 22, would we have as many current open positions? Is 48 open positions for our licensed category, is that typical or is that an anomaly for this year?
I would say it's it's higher than it usually is at this point in the year, and it is pretty much the same across the metro area as we attend our monthly HR meetings.
Okay.
That's due to labor shortages, less people, for example, in licensed land going into the teaching profession. And then in classified and other areas, we know that there is a national labor shortage as well. So it is a little bit higher than usual, yes.
Okay. I was just curious if it's following the national.
It is.
The national trend. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you go to slide 16? So this is where we're gaining people from. Do we know who specifically we're losing our teachers to in terms of, comp or other things? And do we have kind of the inverse of this, the outflow?
I don't have that with me tonight, but I can work with Superintendent Kane to get that. We do see people that move out of state, and we also see people going to our local metro area districts as well.
Thank you. Other directors? Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you very much.
We will now move on to item 11, the Board of Education Engagement Plan discussion, and I believe I will turn this over to Directors Meek and Williams to start us off.
All right, well, thank you. First, thanks to Director Williams for working with me on this plan. We met several times to discuss and review. You'll recognize it from January, but there have been updates. It's evolved since January. So this plan is designed to help create a constructive dialogue between the board and our citizens, and specifically around our ends or our goals. That's the design of the plan. It helps us intentionally and meaningfully listen regarding the needs of our organization and the benefits the district should be providing. And understanding our citizens' values helps us to make decisions consistent with those values. It helps us to be accountable in our governance, and our citizens' trust and support depend on meaningful involvement and influence. And I think we've seen from recent polling, building trust is really important, and this would be a great way for us to tackle that. We only have 10 minutes to discuss, so why don't I turn it over to all of you to ask.
Would you like a particular presentation up there to guide the discussion at all for Mr. Blair? Or?
Sure. If you want to put up the communications plan.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So happy to answer questions, or if you want to just share what key takeaways you have, anything in there that might surprise you or maybe challenges your thinking. And finally, as a board, we really just need to come to agreement on those questions that we'd like to ask our community.
Yeah, Mr. Blair, if we can go down to the questions, which I think is on 3 of 5, and just scroll right there. Perfect, thank you. And maybe actually, let's take a look at the, if you don't mind going down a little bit below. Nope, I'm sorry, my bad. Just come back up, thank you. No, I like these questions. I think that they're a good starting point. We don't want to be so broad across so many topics and take on so much feedback that it just becomes noise and we're unable to isolate things. I think based on the theme that we talked about during our retreats in the summer, kind of starting big to small, mission, vision. We're going to talk about our ends over a series of meetings here through the fall into next year, and then hopefully set up our superintendent, cabinet, and staff to then get the feedback or anything, either a validation or a slight tweaking or whatever we do as a board, set them up to then look at the framework and into the implementation. So I think these are good questions to reflect that strategic return to policy governance, big picture, top down. Of course, I'd love to continue the discussion around mission, vision, and special needs personally as one director, but I think this is a good set that will lead to smaller discussions and targeted things once we get the stakeholder groups going. So thank you for the work. That's about my only comments on that. And I do appreciate the collaboration between Directors Meek and Williams to get this started. I guess my last comment would be, now let's go implement, right? Let's go put some meat on the bone and start scheduling some of these engagements. Other directors, thoughts, comments, questions? Director Ray?
Yeah, I would just echo, thank you, Director Williams and Director Meek for the great work. What I always wonder is how we can honor the work that was done previously. So specifically I'm thinking of Greenway Strategies when we did a pretty comprehensive survey around the strategic plan. And I'm wondering if there's a way to use that, because I think Director Hansen brought this up too, is that when we keep going back out to our community asking them the same questions, they kind of go, I answered that 2 years ago. When you ask what are the greatest challenges that we face, or what is the things that you want to see us achieve, we did that a couple of years ago. So I'm always wondering if there's a way to connect the previous work so we can just build on it. So one of the things I would suggest is we look at that Greenway Strategies survey and the questions they asked to see if we want to build off of those, because it might even be a nice time span for us to kind of look at some pre and post kind of metrics to say, well, back in 2019, I think is when we did the strategic plan, these were the greatest concerns that students had. Now, in 2022, just to give us some ways to be able to say, did we make some progress? Did we have those concerns changed? And then I would also just recommend that we always tie back to our parent engagement policy. Our parent engagement policy has a great introduction, and Director Meek, you kind of captured this with how you started, but I think it'd be great to actually insert from our parent and family engagement policy to insert that paragraph that says, why do we do this? Why is it important for us to have these engagement opportunities with our community? And then also one other alignment would be our core values. You know, we have, we're just starting to see resurface again the core values that have really permeated this district for many, many years. You know, things like continuous improvement and things like educational excellence. You know, we have like about 7 of those core values that are part of our founding documents. And so I was just thinking, as you're bulleting, you know, the engagement plan, you may want to just reference that part of the reason that we do this is for continuous improvement that aligns to those core values. And I guess the only other reference of what we've done previously, you know, Corona Insight, when we did a pretty comprehensive survey using them, and Mr. Reynolds can kind of help guide me here, but it seemed like we did a lot of work with town halls of just defining what questions do the people want us to ask. You know, because I think sometimes we come out and we say, here's questions we want to ask you and we want to know about. But I remember Corona did a really nice job at really surfacing themes. And then from that, we produced a survey because it really was grounded with things that people really were wanting us to ask them about, if that makes sense. So Corona Insights, Greenway Strategies, I think if we can just tie some of the work that we've done previously with them, that would be the thing that I would suggest. But otherwise, I think it looks great. I love the way you've structured it. I love the multiple stakeholder groups that we're tapping. And I agree with Director Peterson. I think especially that first question is something we want to work on, is vision and mission. And so I definitely think that's a question that I would certainly advocate for. I think the other 2 questions, I would just look at what we've done before and see if we can build off of how we asked that previously.
Other directors, and what I was actually fishing for, if you want to pull it up there, Mr. Blair, is on number 2. It was the stakeholder groups that Director Ray just mentioned. And I think there was some very good thought done on diversity of groups and the feedback loops specifically. I like having designated feedback loops, so thank you. Other director comments, questions, concerns? Director Meek?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in. It was really helpful to segment our citizens this way and really highlight the board actually does have established feedback loops with several segments, but it was really interesting to see where we might not have feedback loops. So also the whole idea behind this plan, it is a perpetual plan. So we will continually update it and evaluate and tweak questions as needed. But we, as a board, really need to share with each other. We need to have these conversations on the dais after these meetings happen. And so it really does take up more time. That's the board's time. But it really is meant to be very forward-looking in, you know, designing what we want the district to be long-term. But it's a reflection of what we're hearing from our community. So I'm happy to work on tweaking some of the questions, but feel free to do that as well and do that research, and we can make those final decisions at our next board meeting.
Yeah, that was going to be my closing comment is what is the action ask on this? Is it to, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was our thinking that we would share it tonight, give you time, give all of us time to discuss and everything, but then at our next board meeting, we would actually take action to approve those questions that we do want to move forward with. And we'll work with the superintendent and staff to start getting those scheduled and implemented.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our last study work session item, Board of Education Engagement Plan discussion. I'm sorry, we just did that. It is number 12, Board of Education discussion on N number 1. So continuing where we were last month, where we had a brief discussion around mission, vision, and the top level things, we are taking up the first of our Ns. and that is per guidance policy, and the first N is academic excellence. So 30 minutes open here for directors to make comments on our first of our 5 major strategic outcomes for the district, also known as our ends or goals or end statements. We have 5. They are academic excellence, outstanding educators, safe, positive culture and climate, collaborative parent, family, and community relations, and then financial well-being. Tonight, what I'm hoping we'll do is have a discussion around just end number 1, academic excellence, and we've got 5 sub-bullets. In fact, if I see Mr. Blair's pulling it up right there, thank you. And any conversations in general around this end. And I think the ultimate goal for us as a board is to hopefully either validate or provide some individual director commentary on, is this agreed to? Again, all of these, as it says right up there, were approved back in March of 2018. So this is about probably when we're due cycle-wise to come back through every 4 to 5 years and look at these. So with that, I'll just stop talking and I'll open it up to any directors for their comments on this, knowing that ultimately whatever we put in our ends will be handed off to the superintendent and the staff to then execute and figure out how to achieve these ends. And I'll throw one thing out. I did, just to get the discussion going, did look at some ends on some other districts just to see what other people are doing. I've seen a lot of just bulletized where it would say our 5 ends are, and it would just list the top level bullets and not provide any granularity. I know we had discussion earlier tonight about monitoring reports and things. I'm new to this, and I'm kind of thinking that there's got to be a balance between too general, just do academic excellence, you guys figure it out what it is, and providing too much detail in getting down into the how. I certainly don't want any of the sub-bullets to become how to achieve. They should probably stick to the what and the why. And until we get ends and monitoring report, or not ends, but until we get monitoring reports and some other metrics in there, I think hopefully this provides guidance to our staff without being overly prescriptive. And that's my only concern, is looking at other districts. They probably have a lot less in general than we do. So I'll start with that and open it up.
Go ahead.
Director Meek, go ahead.
I'm happy to go first. I wasn't really sure what we were doing on this agenda item because there was nothing attached. So I wasn't really sure where we were going. But just some general comments. I think we as a board said we weren't planning to change anything drastically. So I don't think that's what we're talking about here. What I will say, a lot of other boards do have more of a higher level statement. And for example, they would say academic excellence with equitable access. I think we go into maybe more detail, but I would not be comfortable changing anything before we do any kind of outreach process. And so my feedback just on academic excellence, you know, the word equitable access jumps out at me. And I think that was another reason the educational equity policy was put in place, because so much of what we heard through all of those other outreach processes and through the, was it the Corona and the Greenway strategies, this is what we were hearing from our community. So what you're seeing is a reflection of what we heard through that past outreach process. The educational equity policy was defining some of the language that was put in place. And so that's just what jumps out at me as I'm looking at academic excellence.
Other directors? Director Ray?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what we were doing, quite honestly, with this agenda item either. And I agree with Director Meek. I thought we kind of were settled into saying these remain the same. But I appreciate the opportunity for us just to do some reflection. These end statements took us a year really to develop, and it was really a combination of not only listening to staff and community, but also it really captured just some of the values of the board at that time as well. But I agree with Director Meek in that I think specificity is important in these, because I think it's just what we've talked about before, is that if we're not clear, then we have no idea when we've hit the target. And so I think we really felt like these main bullets represented the main components of academic excellence. The one that talks about the clearly articulated and supported curriculum was one that really drove our work with literacy, that really caused our system really to take a close look at what was happening in the area of literacy, and in response to that, really adopting programs that would provide that consistency and articulation K through 12, because at one time we were all over the place in our schools with regards to that. So I know one of the things that we have done in the past, and I guess Director Kane can kind of guide us with this, is we would typically prioritize which sub-end we wanted, to have monitored for that particular year, because it's an awful lot of chunks to ask staff to monitor every single one of these to the extent that that a monitoring report typically does. And so that's one thing that I would say that we've done in the past differently, is that we've just said, for this year, all of these are still important to us as a board, but for this year, we're going to focus on the curriculum, or this year, we're going to focus in on the equitable resources piece. And so just wondering about how staff is feeling when they see all these, and are you thinking monitoring reports for this year? But that's my only concern.
Superintendent Kane, if you could, for my information, when you and the cabinet and everyone else read these, what is your translation, or what is your reaction to these in terms of basically what Director Ray just said? We lay these out, we have these enduring priorities, we may emphasize a little here or there, but I guess what I'm really asking is, are we being helpful as a board with this level of detail or not? The one comment I'll make, again, I'm not looking to change or move around. The only thing I see here when I look at these is, if you look at number 3, it's kind of our mission, right? Achieve his or her individual, highest individual potential. When we look at number 4, it's kind of our vision, our 3 pathways that we've identified. We're restating things that exist elsewhere, and I'm just wondering, hey, would it add clarity to just let the mission vision stand and not reiterate those bullet points underneath academic excellence? Again, we have them in other places. So if you wouldn't mind commenting on what these mean to you as a superintendent and your staff.
So staff's job, of course, is to interpret the board's goals and to specify in our monitoring reports how we're interpreting the board's goals. And actually, we have been engaged in that work over the last, 5 weeks. So every week in our cabinet meeting, we tackle one of the board ends and, write really together formulate how we're interpreting each end. And I will say in some cases, we're able to say, okay, we're interpreting it this way. And in other cases, we are kind of like, well, there isn't really an interpretation. It's as written. So some of them are sort of, the interpretation is already baked in. And some of them, we need to be specific on how we're interpreting. So I guess that's the feedback I would have. Matt, I don't know if you, or Mr. Reynolds, I don't know if you have any additional feedback.
No, I think our approach has been to look at each of these in segments and to dive into each one of these statements. Many times when you do an interpretation of an end, you're looking at individual words. Our approach has been more laser focused on each of the bullet points to interpret them holistically that way. Because there is so much detail already baked into each one of these bullet points that we've been interpreting them holistically. The other conversation that we've had internally is there are ends that do cross over because there are themes that represent core values. And so you have a core value that'll appear in one segment, that'll appear in another piece. which it does make it easier for us to interpret because we interpret in one area and that's the same interpretation in another area.
Director Meek or other director comments?
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add, if you're looking at other districts, I think the academic excellence is kind of the end statement, and I think some of the other sub-bullets typically fall within their executive limitations. And so, you know, financial well-being really is tied to executive limitations, like some of the, how you treat your community, how you treat families, how you treat students. So we have things in the ends that I think other policy governance organizations would include within their executive limitations. So that would just be one other insight.
Quick follow-up. Do you think we have redundancies where they're appearing in both the ends and the executive limitations where we need to do some potential cleanup or reallocation? Or do you think it's just that we have it in a different place, in your opinion?
So executive limitations are meant to create these boundaries and say, superintendent, you know, do not go outside of these boundaries, but you have, you know, the latitude to move the district forward. When you put it in the ends, you're prescribing. So it's kind of the opposite. And so I think if there are areas where we feel like we as a board want to specifically state and give detail, it falls within the ends. I don't know if like financial well-being is something that I would say should fall in the ends. I think it is more of an executive limitation. So I mean, every board is different and it's how we want to tackle it as a board, but I also think it's working with the superintendent and staff to create a system that works.
Yeah, I know we're in an interesting area where we're re-implementing monitoring reports in here, so we've got to have something to get to the monitoring reports, and obviously the ends is the start. Other directors, questions, comments? Again, this is the first end we're taking on, so either about ends in general or the specific end number one, academic excellence. Is anyone not committed to academic excellence? So I think we have broad agreement that as a number one priority and outcome and part of the mission is we want to be excellent at academics. So does anybody have any, I guess, issue with any of the sub-bullets? Again, the only thing, and it's not an issue, it's just an observation that we have a restatement of some mission and vision things here, which I obviously totally support. But does anybody have anything that they think is either extraneous or does not belong, or in the spirit of we do the what and the why and the leadership of the district does the how, that's overly prescriptive? Director Williams.
So this is an interesting conversation because I didn't 100% know either what we were going into, but
I'll take the hit on that, apparently. I'm the only one, but I will say that we will discuss the other four ends in a similar fashion. It's really a discussion up here, but that's on me. Go ahead, Director Williams.
having said that, I think that this is an interesting conversation to have, and we should probably continue to have this because I don't know that we're going to be able to make all the decisions that maybe we should make. I mean, we can't even make a decision tonight, but, you know, just moving forward. But I find it interesting what Director Meek just said about executive limitations versus what we have in the ends. And I do feel like it's our lane to direct the superintendent, but maybe not give her so much of the how. And so I want to give latitude, and so I am concerned that maybe this is being too direct and not giving a lot of latitude. Not that this isn't important and not that this isn't what I think we should be doing, but does it belong in a different place is the question, I guess. That's it.
Director Ray.
So a couple of things. One is when we started this task of defining our ends, one of the ways it was framed was, if Douglas County School District were to disappear, how would we describe in enough detail to restart it again? And so that's kind of where the ends came. So we really kind of started saying that these are, if we were to rebuild it because it left, these would be the things that we would put on our dashboard, if you will, to rebuild. And I think, I understand what Director Meek is saying in terms of there's different purpose for ELs and for our board ends. But I think it's kind of like what Mr. Reynolds said. There's kind of a freebie, essentially, is that if one of our end statements actually addresses an EL, it's kind of a freebie for the superintendent to say, fold it into that one, as opposed to having to write, having to do a whole nother, another report. So I'm not concerned about repetition or themes that come back over again, because I think that's good. I think it says when we hear a theme in our vision and in our ELs and in our ends, it must be pretty darn important that we want to make sure it's monitored and make sure that it's part of our system. So I don't have concerns about repetition, but I also think the specificity is good just because it really gives our staff some clarity in terms of that. The only other question I have is in terms of process with monitoring reports. Oftentimes the monitoring report starts out with the interpretation. And I don't know if it would be beneficial before we get too far down the road, since staff is working on that now, is just to have the conversation about the interpretation. That it's not going to be a full-blown discussion about data and implementation or whatnot, but it's just that first statement. We're interpreting your academic excellence goal this way, and we're thinking that these are the data points that we're going to go after to show you evidence that end statement is indeed being addressed. And I wonder if that's step one, so we don't have this crazy event in April and May where you're having to do everything, and then all of a sudden somebody like me says, well, that wasn't quite the way I thought it was going to be interpreted. So,
and that's my concern as well, that again, I don't know if we need to take action if we're not making any changes, but if we all kind of commit and say, look, academic excellence, absolutely, we got little things here, but we're, as a group of 7, agreed to this, then we can hand off, get an interpretation, and then as a group of 7, we go, ooh, hold on, not quite. We can comment on that. Maybe in the future, once we get monitoring reports and things reestablished, we can come back and, based on the interpretations and the monitoring reports be in place, then maybe pull back on some of the verbiage and some of the language here, knowing that the staff is kind of already getting our intent. So I'll leave it to the superintendent or any staff members to kind of comment on those next steps as indicated by Director Ray.
I think Mr. Reynolds has some comments, but then I have some as well. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the comment and the question. As a matter of process, when we issue these, we'll issue them in advancement before you take action. So you'll have time to be able to not only digest the interpretation, but the whole report, and have plenty of time prior to them going to a formal action on your agenda. So you'll have an opportunity to see that as well.
My question though, really, Mr. Reynolds, is would it though be helpful, before you do the whole report and draft the whole report, is it helpful for us to nail down that interpretation, just so that we're all on the same page? Because I think, if your interpretation is this, and these are the data points that you've already are working on and you've drafted, and all of a sudden we come back and go, well, no, not quite. It just seems like it really devalues, if you will, all the effort that's gone into the process. So I'm just wondering if we take a sliver and say, here's the interpretation done, here's the interpretation done, and then we come back and get the draft of the full report in advance. That's, I guess, my question.
We will absolutely, whatever the board so chooses, execute. If you want it earlier or later, we'll execute really whatever you need in terms of monitoring reports.
Superintendent Kane?
I would just add that if it's the board's intention to prescribe interpretation, that's I guess the way I had envisioned this, as you all approved a monitoring report schedule that included the indicators that we're planning on bringing forward. And so at each monitoring report, when we provide those indicators, as well as staff's interpretation, I view that as a great discussion point for you all to provide feedback to the staff as to what you want to see in the future. This is our chance to take each one and really have a discussion point, have a good place to start for a discussion point. And that's since that schedule was. They don't all happen at once, right? It's one at a time. To me, it would make sense to look at the whole package, the indicators that you already approved and the interpretation all together, and then we could have a collaborative discussion about what makes the most sense to you all in terms of interpretation and information that you need, and then we'll adjust accordingly.
Okay, other directors or comments, questions? Go ahead, Director.
I would be fine with that. I just want to save you some time, I mean, it's just all a process, and we've been trying to kickstart this monitoring report business for a couple of years now, and we haven't quite gotten into the pace yet. So I'm just always trying to think, how can we make it easy for all of us so it doesn't feel so laborious, and it becomes more of a process of negotiation, conversation, as opposed to, like you said, I don't think we want to dictate interpretations, but I definitely think as we work together, I want to make it as efficient but as easy as possible. So.
At least in my view, the best way to kick it off is to just do it. And then honestly, as we do it, we can make course corrections and get it better so that by year 2, year 3, year 5, we've got it down to a science. But sometimes you just gotta get behind the wheel and go.
So the Ghostbusters plan of get 'em. Okay, got it. Thank you. Director Hansen.
I strongly agree with that. I think we've been paralyzed seeking perfection for just trying to plan ahead for everything. I fully support jump in, cannonball, let's do it.
Excellent. And so I think hearing no other concerns with N number 1, I think what I'm seeing up and down the dais is general agreement and just a validation that we are continuing to support academic excellence and the sub-bullets here. And I would consider this officially handed off to the superintendent and her staff to go forward with the interpretation and the monitoring reports and everything certainly related to number 1. And we'll try to keep it short on the other ones as well, but I think it's valuable for us as a group of 7 to go through and validate each one. We'll try to do one a month here to just give everyone, not just our staff, but the folks listening out at home in our community, confidence that we are continued to be dedicated to these ends and we support them. So unless there's any other conversation, we'll wrap this up and move it to the next. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Director Williams.
A quick comment, and I also think that what's going to be helpful for us moving forward is once the community engagement plan is actually in place and we're out speaking to people, then we might have different feedback. But I think right now, I personally am committed to what's written. So,
Director Meek.
So are we going to cycle through each of these? Is that the plan?
The plan would be start with mission and vision, and we'll continue that discussion with the engagement plan and the questions that we talked about previously. And then to at least once a month cycle through each of the ends just to make sure we have validation and consensus, and then can hand them off to the staff for their work that they need to do, ultimately ending in monitoring reports. Sorry, it's getting late. Thank you, culminating. Okay, with that, we will move to the next item, which is Board of Education reports. Board of Education regular meeting is scheduled 2 weeks from this evening for the evening of 27th September. That'll be a regular board meeting with public comment and action items. Agenda planning for the 27th September meeting will occur 2 days from now on the 15th of September at 10:30 a.m. Again, I know they've left, but I cannot overemphasize enough the value of the psychological safety position and what that is going to do, not only for us in terms of school safety, threat assessment, awareness, but what it is going to do for our students in mental health. We still have way too high. Colorado, as most of you know, has, compared to other states, significantly high degree of mental health issues, especially in our school-age students. So I cannot commend the Board of County Commissioners and this board for working to make sure that that position was funded. We do have ballot numbers assigned to our items that we voted 7-0. So the mill levy override will be 5A on the ballot in November, and the bond will be 5B. I know that all members of this board and many members of our staff in their educational role, but not an advocacy role, have been going around talking to many cities, town councils, mayors, various stakeholder groups. That will continue, and I expect a onslaught of positive and exciting endorsements to fall here in the next couple weeks. I'll repeat this because it got a good line this weekend. I was talking to a group that was, some of them opposed to taxes, and I stood up and I said, I'm going to talk about the T word, and I'm going to borrow from George H. Bush, the senior. And I said, read my lips. No new teachers. And that is what we are facing. We saw a lot of reports about accelerated retirements. We see people leaving the profession. We got some wonderful data from Mr. Reynolds the other night at the Equity Advisory Council about our capacity, especially in certain subjects. And if we do not pass our mill levy override, we are going to be in a very, very difficult place that we don't want to be in. So that is my plug. That we can do this thing together as a group, and I preemptively appreciate all the efforts of everyone sitting up here on the dais. I know all of you have been out there really engaging and will continue to do so. Last thing on that, we just had an economic impact study that came in from an independent group in Texas. That was done by our wonderful committee that is promoting Invest in DCSD. That's investindcsd.com if you'd like to go volunteer or donate. But the quick summary on that is if we have a successful bond passage, it will bring $538 million into the county, including $160 million in salaries for construction and related efforts alone. Douglas County School District is the economic engine of Douglas County. As we saw tonight, we have roughly 3 in 4 of our staff members live here in Douglas County. We are the #1 employer in Douglas County, and anything that our taxpayers do comes directly back into Douglas County. So cannot stress that enough. And then finally, looking forward to discussing some of our special needs programs coming up here in October. And again, another big thank you and shout out to Directors Meek and Williams for working on the community engagement plan, and I'm excited to see that going forward. Very last thing, we had a lot of slides tonight on safety and security. I'm going to highlight one, 988. So that is our suicide and crisis lifeline. 3 simple numbers. So any students, any parents watching, if people need help, if they're in distress, 3 simple numbers, 988, put it out there, dial it. There are people 24/7 manning that line and willing to help. With that, I will turn it over to Vice President Williams.
Well, I was also going to just say thank you to all the board members for being out and advocating for 5A and 5B, and just encourage that moving forward. I know I'm having a lot of interesting conversations. So mostly positive, and I'm excited about that for this district. Then I pretty much, Director Meek really did most all of the work for the community engagement plan. I was really a sounding board, but so just thanks to her. But and then we had a long-range planning committee meeting last week where we really just talked about where we were having influx of homes and where people were going as far as charter and neighborhood and those sorts of discussions. So it was interesting, but I think most of it Mr. Cosgrove addressed this evening. So that's all I have.
Opening it up from other directors, we'll start this time with Director Hanson.
Just a quick fun one. The Foundation for Douglas County Schools, which is an organization that supports our students make investments in different programs. It's really an exceptional group of our community members working together to support our schools. And they are hosting the Building the Dream Gala, and that will be on September the 29th. And it's going to be at the New Legacy campus, which I think will be one of the first big events there. So tickets are for sale online if many of our community members are interested in joining us. It's going to be a great night.
Thank you. Director Ray?
Yeah, I've got a couple of items, and these are not items for discussion. It's just I want to distribute and introduce and then request that these be placed on the next board agenda. But basically, from the last meeting, I promised you that I would come back with some proposed revisions to Board Policy JCA and JFB. I think that's, I got it, yeah. Basically, really wanting to do some things now to really, hopefully, establish some trust with our community, because certainly, as I think Director Williams said, there's lots of interesting conversations out there, in terms of trust. This specific topic, though, addresses the notion around school vouchers and the concern that this board has an agenda to consider school vouchers. And so this policy that I'm threw out some recommendations to propose really just I think puts to rest that is not part of this district's agenda. I think our superintendent has certainly been out there and making strong statements that why would we incentivize students to leave our district when we have such incredible schools, charter, neighborhood, magnet, whatnot. And so basically you'll see the revisions, the proposed revisions are quite simple. They're underlined and in bold, but again, I would just ask that this be put on our next agenda just so that we can put to rest some of the rhetoric that's out there about that particular topic. And again, I didn't expect us to have a discussion. I just wanted to put a placeholder.
And just for clarity, the two words that are online and the bold, anything that's bold is the changes or additions?
Correct. Anything that's
Okay,
bold
thank
and underlined are the changes. Everything else is our existing policy. So, and then another policy that I would like to recommend be revised. And again, this is in response, I think, again, to some of the angst that we've seen our community have over the last several months. I think a few meetings ago, I suggested that we look at some low-hanging fruit where we can really efficiently accelerate trust, restoring trust with our community. And I think that we also know that the top reasons that we're hearing that people are saying they won't vote for an MLO bond is around trust. Director Meek tried to pass a motion to survey our staff to go a little bit deeper into that, to understand what are the trust concerns. And I really think that one of the things that people are most concerned about is this, what I would call a power shift that we've seen in this board where we have 4 versus 3 directors. And so as I went back through it and reflected on what this board does that has a significant impact on the system, there's really 3 things that we do. Number 1 is that we hire or we fire a superintendent. Number 2 is we adopt a budget. And number 3 is we set policy. And those 3 things are the things that are the most significant actions that we take that really does have a tremendous impact on this, on our system. Every time we pass a 4-3 vote, it seems like it triggers a lot of angst. And it triggers it out in our community, it triggers it out in our staff. And I wanted to kind of spend some time thinking about that because I don't think that's the intent of how a school board is supposed to operate. Congress certainly operates that way, where every 2 years there's always this possible power shift in terms of political affiliation, but we're supposed to be nonpartisan. And so I spent some time really thinking about, well, when do we require a majority vote, or a 2/3 majority vote. So for instance, when we go into executive session, we require 2/3. When we ask to stop debate on the dais, it's a 2/3 vote. So there's times when we do say a 2/3 vote is important. And so this policy that talks about how we set policy, I'm recommending some revisions that we also realize the significance of policy, period. That if we're creating policy or revising policy based on just a simple majority, we're going to have a lot of angst, and we're probably not doing what's best for the system. And so the revisions I'm recommending is just for when we sit and talk about our policies and we revise them, because they have such an impact on the system, that we ought to have those considered as the same significance as when we go into executive session, because truly they have a tremendous impact on the system. When we vote a 4-3, we're basically, the calculation I came up with is we're like 57% in agreement with that particular motion or that particular change. And I don't think any of us that would lead an organization would make a significant change to the organization if only 57% of the people were supportive of that change. And so that's why I really want us to think about, specifically just for policy, it doesn't include resolutions or other motions that we do, but I think it would really help our community, because you guys have heard the rhetoric that I have heard, and that is the fear that all of a sudden this board, the 4 people are going to be in control of changing drastically lots of policies. And I don't think that's the intent of how a board should operate. I think, we have experienced some success with the MLO and bond because all 7 of us said, you know what? It's what's best for the district, it's what's best for our staff, it's what's best for children. And I think that's why we have gotten such great response of people going, okay, I can get behind that because I see all of them are in support of it. So that's just an introduction to this. Again, I want to give you time just to look it over and contemplate it a little bit more with me. But I'm looking at ways that we can take the temperature down with our community. And I think if we continue to have this power shift of 4 versus 3, we're going to continue to have a community that's divisive, that's feeling unsettled, that's making accusations about political agendas and affiliations. And what I want us to be able to do is be a board that's focused on the work of what's most important, and that's working with students. So again, this policy that I passed out to you, I've underlined and bolded just some areas that I think would make a big difference if we would just commit that policy changes require a 2/3 majority vote. And that to me would help take the temperature down with a community that's very nervous about what this board is going to do in the future. And I think it's timely that we do it sooner than later, because I think it will actually get us some votes, some support for this bond and MLO. If we can really show that, no, we've got a mechanism in place to ensure that it's not just a rogue group of people that are making all the decisions, that it really is something that we have to work at. Because when we work together and come to a bigger agreement than just a 4-3 kind of agreement, it's amazing what happens. So the power of our ability to effectively lead this district is second to none, I really believe, because we have diverse views. And when we work together to try to get to that agreement place, I really think that we're very powerful in terms of the influence we have on the system. So that's just an introductory. Again, I would ask that be on the next board agenda so that we can have full discussion about that, because I know I want to give you time to digest that and react and think about it. So those are my 2 items.
I appreciate the early time to think about and review, so thank you for the early introduction. Director Myers? Nope? Nothing? Director Weiniger?
My only update is I just attended one of the car paintings for the MLO bond with Invest in DCSD, and it was a lot of fun, and I encourage everyone to check out the website and see if there's any more car paintings or any other ways to spread the word to get this MLO passed and this bond passed for our school district.
Thank you, Director Meek.
Great. On September 1st, the DAC met to go over the CMAS scores, and Mr. Reynolds did a phenomenal job of introducing how our district has fared, and I think we will see more of that in the near future, but just did a phenomenal job. Also, the DAC passed a resolution in support of the MLO and bond, so I'm wondering where and how that's posted.
Thank you very much for the question. It's actually posted on the website under the meeting agenda. I am going to have a conversation with the chair to see if they would like to have that posted more prevalent on their site. He and I are going to engage in that conversation very shortly.
Great. I was wondering if it should be put on our, like, the board agenda under our committee reports. Like, is that an appropriate place to have it uploaded? Just so it's part of the record? I don't know. I'm throwing it out there as a potential idea. The Long Range Planning Committee met on September 7th, and they also passed a motion in support. And so it just seems like we should make that available to the public somehow.
I will have to consult with Council Klemesh, but I believe as long as we are just factually posting what's out there, then we can probably have a central place.
Great, thank you. And then I think I saw a news flash on my phone today that Lone Tree City Council endorsed. Is that true, or am I spreading rumors now?
I'm not sure. Superintendent Kane and I and two of our principals went and spoke to them. It was a study working meeting with no votes. They certainly indicated that on their next meeting they would pass it, but I don't believe that meeting has occurred yet. Do you have any more information, Superintendent?
I know it was occurring soon, so it could very well have happened.
Yeah, I thought I saw some notification come through, but I couldn't. I was in a meeting, so I didn't open it up, and now I can't find it. So I'm just very curious about that. And so I'm just wondering, are there any other endorsements that have happened that's public at this point in time?
Sorry, I don't think it's public. A lot of them are like Lone Tree, where, like us tonight, we are presenting information at a study work session, and then we have to wait for a follow-up vote. And I expect on the 27th, earlier in the day, prior to our next board meeting, we should have action by the Board of County Commissioners on a resolution as well. So again, I expect lots of these hopefully to come in during the month. And I agree, we need to find a good spot to start aggregating all of these and piling them up. Superintendent, did you have another comment?
Just relaying factual information, it is my understanding that the Castle Rock Economic Development Council passed a resolution endorsing the school district's bond and mill.
Okay, thank you. And
One more thing.
One more. You've got about 2 minutes for us to be on time. So go ahead, Director Meek.
Jumping ahead, my last item, the Douglas County Special Education Advisory Committee, I believe Directors Ray and Peterson are the liaisons. I think it really is important for them to have an opportunity to give us feedback on the Lehman proposal. And so as one of our committees, I'm just curious if you have ideas how we might solicit that feedback from them.
No, I think that's good. I brought it up quickly at the meeting that occurred last week. Unfortunately, they do not meet every month. The next meeting, I believe, is November 2nd, but we can certainly ask the co-chairs to include that item to review the proposal and give us some feedback. Deputy Hyatt, did you have any other suggestions? I know that you had a lot of representatives there at the meeting the other night.
So DCCAC has already reached out to me, and they are interested in having this conversation in the near future. So I will let you know when that happens.
Okay, thank you. Director Ray?
And I think DCCAC, aren't they scheduled to present to us in October?
They are in October, correct.
Yeah. So we'll have that opportunity to talk with them then as well, even if it's informal we'll have a chance to dialogue with them.
For me, it was just feedback. I'd love to hear from them before we vote at the next board meeting on the Lehman proposal. They're one of our committees. Their role is to give us feedback and input, and it's such a vital part of that Lehman proposal.
Yeah, I don't know, Superintendent, if we could reach out and do anything short of that, so.
Yes, as I said, they've already been in contact with me this evening, so I asked when they are meeting next as a board, and so I will follow up tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Any other items from directors?
Question.
Go ahead, Director
Just
Ray.
one correct. So I know, Director Peterson, you have a standing, I think you and Superintendent Kane have a standing agenda item of meeting with a Board of County Commissioner person, is that right, on a monthly basis?
A monthly basis, just to keep up to date on what they're doing, what we're doing, just coordination.
So just, it would be interesting, I think, for all of us to have that information so that when, if you guys could just quickly summarize, ever so often and just feed that back to us as we're talking about liaison reports and things like that, it would just be helpful, so.
Sure, agreed. We, I think we canceled last one due to people being out of town and things, so we haven't had one since last school year, but yes, agreed.
Actually, I just wanted to, really quick before you adjourn, just throw a shout out to you all for the time. Our staff greatly appreciates being able to end the evening at 9 o'clock. So I just wanted to express our sincere appreciation to all of you for that. Thank you.
And so far, I give ourselves a pretty good job on the norms so far. We'll keep working it. And with that, I will move on to the final item, number 16, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
By multiples, I will go with by Williams, seconded by Myers. Director Hansen.
Aye.
Meek.
Aye.
Myers.
Aye.
Peterson, aye. Ray.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Weiniger.
Aye.
7-0, and 1 minute. We'll do better next time. Thank you.